You just heard there. You've wanted to talk with Drew. You've been keen to have this. You've been keen to have me as the moderator, which is partly why I've wound up here. So yeah, state your opening piece. What have you kind of taken issue with Drew's position on things like housing and migration?
Yeah, too easy. I think that alongside climate change, although I think climate change is a global issue, I think in Australia, housing is the most pertinent problem that we have to face, not only as a population, but specifically our generation, because as young people, we have to face the consequences of the incredibly stuffed up housing market that we live under today. I think that Drew Pavlou, in my opinion, has done an incredible disservice with his platform in contributing to the debate on housing. And I think his content brings down the caliber, brings down the quality of the discussion, because I think he unduly shifts the blame and focus on immigrants. He periodizes the housing crisis, in his view, to only the last few years, where in reality it's a much more extensive and long-term and perhaps endemic, systematic problem in Australia. So I've got a few questions for Drew. To kind of clarify.
Question for you. I've got a question for you.
Hold on. I've got a few questions. No, it's my opening statement.
I will let Adu finish his opening piece here.
Okay, Adu. Okay, sure thing.
So, what is the housing crisis, Drew? What's your solution, or what are some solutions, or if you don't have a central solution, what are some things we can do to alleviate that housing crisis? Where do immigrants where do immigrants fit in that? And why do you always only talk in spurious correlative terms? Why do you never bring up the academic literature, which has gone in depth in terms of systematically looking at housing and immigration and housing in general? And specifically, if you want to bring up the spurious correlation stuff, why has, for example, the ACT, a territory in Australia, seen similar population growth to other states like Victoria, New South Wales, Western Australia, yet rents have fallen, or in the years that they've grown significantly less compared to other states in recent years? Again, population growth, very similar, if not more in some cases than, for example, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, WA, yet rents have fallen in some years or have grown significantly less. Why is that? Second question, the last question I have is, Victoria's house prices have declined since 2022, since their peak in 2022, by 6.5%. Immigration, contrarily, has increased dramatically since. So if this idea of immigration is causing the housing crisis is true, why do we have so many examples of there just not being a correlation? If you want to play that game, if you actually want to talk about,
this is a bit difficult, Adu, because you have asked me why. Adu, you've asked me about 5 questions, so should we break them down?
So we can start with the first question. We can start with the first one.
Okay.
What is the housing crisis?
Okay, what is the housing crisis? The housing crisis relates to the fact that housing in Australia is literally one of the most expensive housing markets in the entire world. When we're talking about both property prices and rentals, we have really unaffordable housing crisis. At the level of property, I believe that the housing bubble in Australia is now bigger in relative terms, on per capita terms. It's bigger than it was at the height of the Japanese housing bubble. So if you compare the Australian housing bubble per capita with the housing bubble in Japan, it's now worse than Japan was at the height of their housing bubble. I've never once said that.
I think you're talking about is household debt to GDP is higher.
Sorry, no, we're talking about the size of the residential market, the total cost of land and private property in Australia, against the size of the Australian GDP. And if you compare that to what the size of the residential property market was in Japan relative to their GDP at the height of the housing bubble in Japan, we actually have it's worse in Australia right now.
Yes, it's gotten
worse. I believe okay. Adelaide is now more unaffordable than London. Basically 5 of Australia's cities are in the top 10 most unaffordable cities in the world to live in terms of just property prices. I think, Adelaide is literally more expensive than San Francisco, which is infamously expensive. Brisbane is ahead of, and Sydney, I think, is literally the second most expensive in the world after Hong Kong. And I think I've seen statistics that, for home leavers to save just for a deposit on a home, For a school leaver in Sydney to say for the deposit on a home, it will take them up to 46 years. So we are dealing with one of the biggest property bubbles basically in history. And there's also...
Do we agree that the housing crisis is primarily, but not only one, but primarily one of affordability?
Yeah, of course. We're talking about affordability. It's unaffordable for the average person. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the housing crisis.
That's okay. All right, so we largely agree. I think there's some other things we could have talked about, but I generally agree that primarily the problem here is affordability, or at least that's the consequence of many of the crises surrounding housing. And another question I had that I forgot to include, but it directly connects to this one is, okay, so then what has caused this housing crisis? Because obviously unaffordability is the consequence of it, but what has actually caused, and how long have we been in a housing crisis for, right? So what has caused it? Has it been around for a while? What's the kind of go with that?
Yeah, so this has gotten particularly bad since COVID. I agree with you that, by some metrics, we've had a housing shortage for many years now, but it has gotten particularly bad since COVID. Prices went down for some years during COVID when borders were shut, and when borders were shut, there was commensurately an increase in the amount of rentals on the market. So rental vacancies, those numbers increased across the country, and we saw prices decline in a number of cities. Since before you go on, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's like multiple things that are wrong. This is Melbourne centric, so I might be wrong in other cities, but in Melbourne, rental vacancies fell during COVID, and then the reason exactly.
No, as in like they're lower. So that if there was less supply in the
market. No, that's not true. Melbourne went up to about 5% rental vacancies during COVID.
Oh wait, no, it might have been Sydney. It was one of the cities. Wait, let me look it up.
So Melbourne went up to 5%. Melbourne went up to 5% rental vacancies right now. Right now in Brisbane, the rental vacancy rate I think is 0.8%, which is just cataclysmic. I was trying to find a rental earlier this year, and I literally had to apply for 70 different properties before I got one. And listen, before Adu tries to caricature me or strawman me, I've never once said that this is just a problem of immigration. And Melbourne is actually a good example whereby you're right, house pricing has actually relatively declined in Melbourne compared to Sydney and Brisbane in recent years. They've been building way more than Brisbane and Sydney. I actually have always said we need YIMBY policies. We need to increase supply while at the same time being a bit more measured when it comes to reducing demand. So unfortunately, all the government...
So there's a few things that...
I'm still going.
I'll let Drew finish his statement just quickly.
Sure.
Quickly, Drew.
So this is a very bad problem because basically every major party and the government of the past 10 years and every major party, all their policies to address the housing affordability crisis, they're all demand side policies. So they're all subsidizing demand. We're going to pay for people to get into the market with 5% deposit rates instead of 10%. We're going to take in the historically largest number of migrants ever in Australia's history. There's just always policies that are basically piled on each other, built around basically subsidizing demand. And yeah, this is part of the problem. It's not just immigration. There's obviously been a massive asset price increase with quantitative easing, the era of ultra low interest rates. Properties turned into, a speculative asset. It's all about basically the commodification of housing. So I actually agree, the commodification of housing is wrong. Never once have I ever been this hardcore capitalist when it comes to housing. And, when you ask me what sorts of policies should we contemplate, I actually think a lot of what...
We'll get to that. No, I was
going to say, what I actually favor is actually quite similar to what Singapore does. So Singapore, for example, has very high taxes on foreign nationals buying into the market. So that's designed to try and stop these assets becoming speculative assets. There's also mass public housing in Singapore, and I favor mass public housing. I think we should be building mass public housing in Australia. So that's the thing, right? Like I want to increase supply as much as possible. I want to reform zoning and regulations to make it cheaper to make housing. I want to have Singapore-style public housing, and also at the same time, I want to lower immigration because I think that is obviously something in the short term that puts a lot of demand onto the market. So my approach to this is actually a purely pragmatic one. It's not ideological. I approach this as, as Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. And that's basically my approach to the property thing. I think there's all sorts of different things that
there's a lot of things, yeah. If you want,
it's the commodification of property, ultra low interest rates, people turning property into a speculative asset. That's a cultural problem in Australia, where in Australia we actually think of this really in terms of speculative assets. This is people's main nest egg, and everybody's always thinking and talking about the housing market as though it's like a casino. That's a big part of it. So it's a cultural problem. It's also governments always subsidizing demand rather than supply. There's restrictive zoning stuff that's really tough. But also part of this as well, Adu, is when you massively increase demand in a very short time frame. Right now, we have seen the historically large, in historical terms, this is the largest net increase of migrants and temporary visa entries into Australia in the entire history of Australia. Even going back,
there's a lot of things here. I don't know if you want to jump in because there's like a million.
That is a lot of points. Adu,
I can go through the important ones. The number one thing I think is really interesting that Drew Pavlou, this is the first time, Drew, that you've talked about
it's actually not though.
I've just looked at your Twitter.
It's literally not.
No, Drew.
When I ran in 2022, I literally had a policy
I can't speak at the same time as you. I've just looked up on your Twitter. The word commodification doesn't appear once on your Twitter.
I didn't use that
a million times a day. Okay.
I haven't used that. Okay, Adu.
I'm great that you've conceded this. This is the first time you've kind of located the problem.
If you type in
commodification,
look at my Twitter. Type in the word bubble. Type in the word speculative. Type in all these things. I've talked about this being a frenzy. I've talked about this being a bubble. So I've obviously talked about
all the anti-immigration people who censored about an immigration-centric focus talk about the housing bubble. That doesn't mean they think that the commodification of housing is the fundamental problem here. So just because you may use the terms housing bubble, so does Leith Van Onselen, so does all these other people
who talk
about housing, but they don't fundamentally think it's a problem with commodity production. They think they want to lay zero on immigration. So just because you may use the word bubble doesn't mean that you automatically. I mean, now you're admitting it that it's fundamentally a problem of commodity production, but that was one side thing. That was one side thing. I just wanted to get in there because you haven't used the word.
There's a comment here. Why is the commodity expensive?
Once at all. But okay, let's go through one by one the points that you've brought up. So you said that we have been living in a housing shortage for decades. I think you said, or the last decade.
We have had a housing shortage for a long time. But look, this is semantic.
Okay, for a long time. No. It's not semantic because it's really important, and it actually ties in to maybe why I didn't actually want Cameron Murray on this, because Cameron Murray disagrees with you. I don't know, and this is why I say I don't know how much of Cameron Murray you've read. Clearly not a lot. Cameron Murray, in my opinion, one of his best pieces of work that's been published in, I think, Housing Studies, maybe a different journal, but one of his best pieces of work was documenting specifically that we don't have a supply problem, that we have a lot of excess supply in this country. He's written about it in Michael West. He's written about it in these academic journals. In my opinion, that's some of his best work. And so clearly you're not actually very familiar with Cameron Murray's work if you think that that's a central problem of our housing crisis, that we have a shortage. Cameron Murray's work debunks you. He documents specifically how we actually have a significant excess in supply of housing. That actually it's more of a distribution problem. So clearly you haven't actually read Cameron Murray's work, the person you wanted to bring on your own team. So this is ridiculous from you. I think this is insane. It shows that you're not familiar with the source material of people you claim to be friends with. So I think you should, if you want to talk about every single paper he's ever published. It's one of his biggest papers and most cited papers ever. Like it's a pretty big part of his work. It was in his book.
He does say that immigration is a big significant part of the problem.
Well, again, I disagree with Cameron Murray on a lot of things, but this is your guy that you wanted to bring on, that you thought was.
I didn't say he's my guy.
An essential part of your argument about being a housing shortage is debunked by Cameron Murray in one of his best pieces of work, in my opinion, in his contribution to the literature. So I just find that really interesting. I don't care about Alan Kohler's a journalist.
Progressive economist Alan Kohler.
He's not an economist. He's a journalist.
I don't want everyone to be speaking over each other because no one's going to hear anyone. And I'm conscious.
I was relatively quiet.
We could mention Cameron. We can mention Cameron Murray all night, but Cameron Murray's not here. Adu, I'll let you jump in.
I would like the reason why I reference Cameron Murray, not just because I think it's really funny that Drew thought he was on his team on this, but because Cameron Murray has really good work on how we don't actually have a housing shortage in this country. We have a significant excess of housing in this country. We have excess capacity. We have excess ability to build more capacity. So it's a distributional problem, not necessarily a scarcity problem. Now, and I bring that up because Drew thought that this would be a good person to have on his team when he thinks supply is a central problem. But anyway, next point. He's right in that Melbourne's vacancy rate was it peaked in 2021. It did fall afterwards. I got it wrong. I was referencing the national vacancy rate and Sydney specifically as well, where they did see a relative peak in early 2021, but then cascaded downwards significantly right any time before we opened the borders. So this idea that rents were low during COVID and we had a super high vacancy rates and that only reversed after we brought in all these immigrants, it's just not empirically representative. It may be true in Melbourne, but it's not true in reality. Now, another reason why we may have seen low rents during COVID is because there was a rental moratorium across numerous states. Melbourne, New South Wales, Queensland, WA, they all had rental moratoriums during 2020, which is basically a rent freeze. And there were more rental regulations, so no fault evictions, all this stuff, right? These were all regulated. The rental market was heavily regulated during COVID. These all contributed to rents flatlining essentially during 2020. And then when they were lifted in 2021, we see rents begin to uptick. Braden brought this up in your first discussion and you didn't answer it, Drew. So I would like a direct answer to this. Hold on, I'm not finished.
I'll let him ask the question, and then Drew, you can get in a nice direct answer.
No, I've got another point as well after this, but I'll let him answer this specific question. Why do you only talk about again, you've got it wrong on the vacancy rates. You got it right on Melbourne. You didn't get it right nationally or not on Sydney. Why do you only talk the vacancy rates and about immigration and not about the rental moratorium, even when it was brought up to you specifically by someone else? And now I'm asking you directly, do you think the rental moratorium had any effect on rents at all?
It did have an effect. I'm sure it had an effect. But what I'm saying is I don't think that a national rent freeze is a correct solution to this current problem because...
But you're pointing to it as a good thing. You were just saying, oh, during COVID it was great. Why not?
Let him answer just a bit.
Adu. Now, you can say, okay, we've got, it's a distributional problem. Let me explain it to you, right? Just because we have more houses than people in this country doesn't mean that there's excess supply, okay? Because the only way that there's excess supply then is if you're starting to talk about confiscations of people's homes. Is this what you want? For example, we had rent freezes for a certain period during a time.
Are you disagreeing with Cameron Murray?
A historic crisis.
Are you disagreeing with Cameron Murray?
Sorry, what did you say?
Are you disagreeing with Cameron Murray?
Again, sure, maybe I am. I haven't read every single thing he's ever written. I'm not an academic.
This is like one of his pieces of work.
Okay, let me explain to you. I'm still going. We had a rental moratorium during one of the greatest economic crises in the past 100 years. Sure, that was a good solution during COVID. Is it a good solution now when you're also artificially increasing demand massively by having the largest possible migration increase in the entire 60,000 year history of the Australian continent, the entire 60,000 year of...
Thank you for bringing it back to this. I can answer this directly. If you want, I can answer this directly. Yes, we should. And and the proof that it works is the ACT, because you didn't directly talk about that either. The ACT has the highest amount of rental regulations, it has rent control, and it has similar population growth to other states and territories.
Canberra is also still really expensive. Canberra is still really expensive.
It's expensive, but if you want to talk about growth and proportion, we actually need to talk about not absolute values. You need to talk about growth and proportions. The ACT saw rents fall in some years after COVID, and it saw rents when they did increase, not increase as much.
Now ACT,
like Melbourne,
as we know, doesn't have any councils.
Like Victoria, New South Wales.
No local councils in the ACT. No local councils in the ACT. Would you be advocating abolishing all councils in Australia? I mean, there's all sorts of different unique.
Do you have any proof that the lack of local councils is what? Again, if you actually read Cameron Murray's work, overwhelmingly over 90% of approvals go through. Over 90% of building approvals go through from local councils. Again, if you read Cameron Murray's work, you'd know this. Cameron Murray specifically, that's like part of his paper. If you read Cameron Murray, you'd know this.
I'm not Cameron Murray. I know, but
Cameron
Murray right now.
I'm not Cameron Murray. To bring him in this discussion. And again, I respect Cameron Murray for his work, but clearly you don't respect his work.
Well, I'm not. No, Adu, I'm not Cameron Murray. I'm not a PhD.
So I'll ask you again. ACT had a similar population growth to other states and territories, yet rents fell in some years and grew significantly less compared to other states in other years. So what do you think is different? Do you think the rental regulation in ACT had any impact on the rental market being less excessive?
There's all sorts of different things when it comes to
it's all sorts of different things. Not specifically regulating rent.
We've gone on back and forth on this. I'll let Drew explain his point here.
You actually interrupt constantly.
You interrupt me the whole time.
ACT, you know this. There are so many different unique factors when it comes to ACT. And Dr. Cameron Murray himself has written about this. The fact that, for example, in the ACT, all the land is ultimately owned by the territory, not private individuals. There's all sorts of different unique things right now.
Look, as a communist now.
What do you say?
Look, as a communist now. I agree with the land should be public.
I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying that the exact conditions of Canberra should be replicated across the entire country, because at the end of the day, I still support private property rights.
Okay, so Drew, so if we agree that the ACT has a set of policies and arrangements which make it so they can have similar population growth to other states and territories,
let me explain to you.
Significantly, hold on, have significantly lower rents.
That we should implement communism in Australia in response to fucking massive immigration. Okay,
I'll be happy
let him
to
ask the question, Drew. We'll let Adu ask the question.
I'll be happy to grant that land should be public, that local councils should be less obstructionist, even though, again, Cameron Murray's work proves that local councils aren't as obstructionist that Yimbys often make it out to be. But anyway, I'll grant that, sure, we can reduce the role of local councils and we can make land public, we can introduce all these rental regulations. And clearly the ACT has shown that it's worked. Like, we can have similar population growth and have lower rental growth. Or lower rental price growth. So it's really interesting, Drew, that you want to idea of private property rights, even though clearly in other states it's led to increases in rents.
Let me explain this, right? Unexpected levels of massively high immigration, right?
ACT has similar population growth to other states.
Let me interrupt you. I haven't even made my point yet. Let me explain. It's the Drew Pavlou show. You have to let me talk.
We'll let Drew finish his point. Give him 30 seconds.
Okay. If the choice is between abolishing all private property in Australia and following every single thing that the ACT does, simply so that we can have unlimited, infinity, open borders immigration. No, that's not something I favor, because I still ultimately, at the end of the day, support private property rights. So
incredible,
yes, ACT does do something.
You haven't answered the question.
I mean, what's the question? What do you want me to say?
The question is, why are you against the clearly working affordable housing affordability measures in the ACT?
But ACT is still really expensive. ACT is still expensive. Really expensive.
But again, we're talking growth, and we're talking growth. We're talking proportionality, right? So not an absolute term.
Let me say something. I'm still talking. Adu. In 2022, I was thinking of moving to Canberra. I was looking at the rents then. Even in 2022, I was thinking this is insanely expensive. It's still really expensive in ACT.
Absolutely,
so I disagree. ACT is a beautiful fucking paradise. It's not a beautiful paradise.
I never said that.
I
think there's absolutely. There's tons of problems with the ACT. It's not solved housing. I've never inferred that it's solved the housing crisis. All I'm saying is that if you're saying that importing a massive amount of people or whatever necessarily is going to necessarily has contributed.
Let me ask you a question.
Hold on. Has necessarily caused our rental housing crisis, then why in the ACT haven't we seen those similar levels of growth? Even though we've seen similar population growth, we haven't seen those excessive rental price growth. Why haven't we seen it?
It's a red herring because it's ultimately one.
It's absolutely not a red herring. It debunks your whole shtick.
It doesn't though.
Immigration caused the rental
because it's not politically viable. Because Adu, it's not politically viable to abolish all private property across Australia and have all levels of government in Australia.
We're not talking about what's electorally viable. We're talking about what works. Just because something's not electorally viable doesn't mean it doesn't work, right?
No, but we have to try and think about what we're going to do to solve the housing crisis, right?
We're not the you're not the prime minister. I'm not the opposition leader. We're not talking into an electorate. I'm talking to you. You're talking to me. We're talking about solutions. We're talking about what works. We're talking about reality. The electorate doesn't matter in this discussion.
The nationalisation of all private property in every state how would you do that? How would you do that?
Well, clearly they've done it in the ACT, but again, you're dodging the fundamental point here. You're dodging the fundamental point here, Drew, is that in the ACT, we saw, due to, I mean, you want to owe it to the fact that it's a communist utopia or something, which again, it's not.
I didn't say that. I never said that.
You just did. You said, oh, the ACT is this communist utopia. But anyway, you owe it to something.
We're going on about very minor points, about very minor language. The question was,
Leo, I can link it back. We can link it back, Leo.
I'll let Adu quickly get in his specific question to you, and then Drew, I'll let you respond, just so we know what we're all talking about here, because they're going through.
Leo, I've already asked my question about 3 times, and he hasn't answered. He keeps pivoting to the fact, he wants to uphold property rights, but he doesn't actually explain specifically why that will help the housing crisis, and why in other states where clearly his motive arranging housing has been done, but clearly isn't working, and why the ACT is bad.
No, they're not
outside of nebulous.
Let him finish. Let him finish.
If he doesn't want to answer, that's fine. We can move to other things. I find it really interesting that he can't address the specific point. It's weak. It's weak that you can't address the specific point. It's weak. It's very weak.
What do you want me to ask? Why Canberra is different? Canberra has a specific set of political arrangements that are not viable to be applied to the rest of the country.
How come?
Because it would require the nationalisation of all land. As Noel says here, we can only solve the housing crisis if we implement communism. So, okay, what a beautiful...
I think we would actually, yeah.
Let me say this.
Drew, you're not answering the question. You're just...
I'm actually muting you so I can answer. I'm actually muting you so I can answer. Adu, isn't it convenient that you have infinity migration and then you go, oh, look, infinity immigration has lifted house prices. Oh, the only thing that we can do is implement full gay race communism, and therefore we'll be able to stop the housing prices from going up and increasing.
Why can't you answer the specific argument, Drew? You have to rely on these stupid...
I've answered your question.
I
said Canberra. I've literally answered your question. I literally said what's happened in Canberra is not politically viable and not desirable for the rest of the
I
country.
agree. It's not electorally viable right now, but it doesn't mean it's not effective. You haven't answered why it's not effective.
I don't agree that with taking the ACT model and applying it to the rest of the country, which would involve the nationalisation of all land in the country. Because I don't think if here's a question, right, Adu? You've got two questions. You got two choices. One choice is you reduce migration from 500,000 net a year to 250,000, which was what it was prior to COVID. Or we nationalise all land in the country. Which one do we do to solve the housing crisis? Oh, I wonder what would be easier. Maybe just reducing migration from what it was 4 years ago.
It's not a scarcity problem. It's a distributional problem.
But it is a scarcity problem because there's a scarcity in the cities where people want to live. There's a scarcity in Melbourne, there's a scarcity in Sydney, there's a scarcity in Melbourne. There's 5 cities in Australia that are in the top 10 most expensive in the world. So there is a scarcity problem, Adu.
There's not a scarcity problem. Cameron Murray debunks you.
Okay, what's the solution then? Like basically just...
So you're giving up the point already. That easy, Drew. You're giving up the point.
What point? What's your point?
My point is that Cameron Murray debunks it. There's a scarcity problem in this country.
I'm not. We're not debating with you said Cameron Murray's not in. Okay,
I'm referencing his work. I'm referencing his work. Do you have a specific refutation of his work?
But did you notice that I never referenced his work once?
I am. I'm referencing his work. I'm referencing his work. So what do you say to his work? There isn't a housing shortage in this country. That we've had way more homes built in the past few years than houses that have formed in the past.
Well, yeah, we've got the second highest. We've got the second highest rate of construction in the entire OECD. That's true. Yet why is it the case that we're still in the top 5 of our cities are in the top 10 most unaffordable in the country?
Well, you blame it on immigrants. I think it's the fact
I don't just blame it on immigrants. I say it's a whole. I've given you 5 different things. I've said
that's true. So you think it's immigrants? You think hold on. You think it's immigrants? You think it's immigrants? Which we've gone through population growth isn't translating to high house prices or high rents and ubiquitously across the country. You've blamed it on supply problems. Cameron Murray debunks you on supply problems. You haven't specifically refuted his work on supply yet. And you now, for the first time in your career, Drew, for the first time, you've brought up the commodification of housing. Never have you used the words commodification of housing in your entire existence online.
Do you think that property should be confiscated in this country?
Yes, and it currently is right now being confiscated. Yes,
okay.
That's currently legal, by the way. We do it for infrastructure projects.
Okay, whose property should be expropriated? What should it look like?
I don't want to let you get off this. I don't want to let you. We can talk about this. We can talk about my solutions.
You're not answering my question. This is actually fundamental. This is actually fundamental.
You haven't answered my questions yet, Drew.
What's your fucking question?
Keep dodging the argument.
Why don't we implement gay race communism to stop the housing bubble? I'm telling you, I don't want to implement gay race communism.
This can all be done under social democracy. This can all be done under social democracy, unless you think the ACT is like actual existing communism, which is funny.
No, I'm not. I don't think the ACT is actually
great. So we can implement their model and have
I don't think nationalising all property rights in the entire country is a viable solution to the housing crisis that you have created.
Sure.
You've created this housing crisis.
It's a hard battle, but practically we can do it.
Because you're advocating infinity open borders migration.
So again, no argument, no counter argument, no understanding of the point.
Isn't it convenient? The only solution is
you want to bring in 1 million people. It's the same old bullshit, Drew. Like, actually, where's your argument? There's no counter argument. There's no refutation.
I've given you my argument.
No, you're not. You're just saying I want gay race communism.
No, I said you've said that property should be confiscated, and you think that we should abolish private property rights in Australia. Basically, you think that all land should be
Drew, what do you
nationalised
think?
like in Canberra.
Drew, just a quick question, Drew. What do you think? What do you think they do? What do you think the government does when they want to build a really big infrastructure project, like a highway or a train station, and someone's house?
Yes, I know eminent domain exists. I know eminent domain exists. But
great.
The entire state. You're talking about the entire state of Queensland, the entire state of New South Wales, all property nationalised by the government, which is insane.
Well, but by virtue of having eminent domain, the government can seize it. It's legal.
But is it desirable? No, it's not.
It's not a question of practicality. It's not a question. I know you think that. You keep quoting back to you think this. You think that. You feel that. You have lots of feelings through, but no arguments, no reason why this obsession with private property actually helps the housing crisis. So again,
let me ask you this:
clearly the ACT has abolished private property rights or whatever.
We'll stop. I am, guys. I know you can't hear it as well, but I certainly can hear it. In terms of speaking over each other, I know the audience wants to hear everyone.
You know what? Let's just mute each other. Every time that somebody, Leo, just say it's Drew's turn and then it's Adu's turn, and then we'll just.
I am conscious of that, but also I am conscious that you control the stream and you kind of control the mute.
Look,
so as moderator,
I'd love someone to do a tally. I'd love someone to do a tally to see who's interrupting who. Look, I admit I've interrupted Drew when I feel like he's deviating from the point. But there's many times where I've been
can I ask you a question now?
Look, if you want to do like a
okay, I'm asking the question. Section 51 of the Australian Constitution.
I'll let him ask this question. I'll just let him ask the full question. Drew.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What is Section 51 of the Australian Constitution? We both know that eminent domain requires redress to owners. So how much will it cost to nationalise the entire private property market in Australia? The current value of the Australian private property market is $11 trillion because it's literally 3.5 times our GDP. I mentioned this earlier. It's already higher than the Japanese housing bubble at the height of the Japanese housing bubble. So tell us how you're going to source $11 trillion to nationalise all private property in the country.
Well, I don't think we need to nationalise all private property to replicate what the ACT has.
Okay, but the ACT in the ACT, the government controls all private property, correct?
So, do you think private property rights don't exist in the ACT?
No, people can have 99-year lease. People have 99-year leases, but at the end of the day, the property is held by the Crown in territory.
So why not just do that?
Okay, but you would still need to compensate people because you're taking their freehold title. So to take their freehold title and say, no,
I don't think we need to seize everyone's homes. Look, I think in an ideal world, land would be communally owned or publicly owned. But in terms of, again, this can all be done under social democracy like the ACT, where we don't have to take everyone's home or everyone's land.
That's who are we doing How are you paying for this?
I think a good start would be taking or expropriating empty properties. There are about 100,000 or so in Melbourne, in metropolitan Melbourne. That's excluding holiday areas that have high concentrations of holiday homes. So we're not taking people's holiday homes, but in areas where there's not a high concentration of holiday homes, there's about 100,000 empty homes in Melbourne alone. Okay, so I think that's a great start.
We'd have to compensate the owners for this, correct?
Legally, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So how are you going to do that?
You pay them money.
Okay. How are you going to afford it?
By paying them the money. It's the government.
Okay, tell us how you're going to source the funds required to nationalise 100,000 privately owned homes just in the metropolitan area of Melbourne. And presumably you would want to do this in Sydney and Brisbane and Adelaide and Perth as well. So you're talking about nationalising about probably 400, 500,000 homes, right? Let's remember that a significant number of these unoccupied homes actually have big structural issues with them. A lot of them are literally not under. A lot of them are not held in a proper state of repair right now. So how are you going to afford to do all of this? Wouldn't it just be easier, Adu? Wouldn't it just be easier rather than nationalising 500,000 homes? Wouldn't it just be easier to say, instead of having 500,000 net migrants a year, let's have 200,000? Which is what we had 5 years ago.
I don't think immigration is the root problem or even a
significant so how many people should we have a year? How many people should we have a year?
So you can't ask me a million questions, Drew. So I don't think immigration is the root or a significant. I think it's a measurable problem, and problem in terms of it has measurable effects. But if we reduce immigration, if we reduce immigration to 200,000, I don't think that effect will be really that significant, particularly, again, if we want to reference the literature, which Drew clearly hasn't read, about an increase in population by 1% increases house prices by 0.9%. So reducing population by not even a percentage would be very negligible in terms of impacting the rental housing market and the home
this
buying
is actually
market.
let me say, this is a substantial multiplier in markets that are already stretched massively thin. Like in a situation where you've got 0.8% rental vacancy rates, 1% is a huge difference.
But no, it's not. That's not how that works.
No, it is. It is though. We're talking. Okay.
No, it's not. Have you read the paper? Wait, have you read that paper that I'm specifically referencing?
The Molami and Meister paper.
Yes.
Yes. So 0.9% for every 1% population increase. So
what does the methodology do, Drew? What do they do in the methodology?
I don't know. Again, I do.
So you haven't read it. You haven't read it. So why would you say you've read it if you don't know?
Economist.
I'm not either. And I've read it. I know what they do.
I know what they do.
So why would you lie? Why would you lie and say you've read it, but you haven't read it?
Yeah, I read it. I read it like 3 years ago. I don't fucking remember the exact methodology. Okay.
This is
retarded. This is actually retarded. Like, I read it. I read it more recently than I can recall the exact methodology.
Specific questions that I had for you, and specifically answer your questions as well. I don't think there's an ideal migration. I believe, hopefully, you as a liberal also believe this, in the fundamental right of people to exercise their freedom of movement.
No, I don't agree with that. Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Well, I think there are times that we can restrict it. So during a pandemic, for example, I think it's fine to restrict people's right to freedom of movement. But as like a base, I think people should be able to move wherever. Then there should be like restrictions based on like whatever, right? So I don't have like an ideal like crystallized number of immigration. However, I think reducing the rate of immigration from 500,000 or whatever it is right now to 200,000, I think that have an incredibly negligible effect on housing. So we have to look for other things. And look, Drew even admitted that this is like a tangential issue. This is not part of the systematic problem of, Drew admitted before, the commodification of housing. So getting rid of a few 100,000 migrants or so wouldn't actually fundamentally address the issue. So clearly you're not actually interested in addressing the issue.
We've got 0.8% rental vacancy in Brisbane. So yes, very clearly adding hundreds of thousands of people a year to our major capital cities. We've got five major capital cities and everyone's crammed into them. Yes, it will have an impact. If we're talking about
clearly you haven't read Moalemi either as well, because Moalemi says, yes, there is an impact, but specifically he measures the impact. So clearly you haven't actually read the paper.
I mean, I read it years ago.
He doesn't say that there's no impact. He says there is an impact. This is the impact. It's statistically significant. We can measure it. But in terms of the overall housing market, it's like relatively tangential. So I think in focusing all this antagonism towards immigration, which you do, by the way, you haven't mentioned commodification on your Twitter once in your whole entire, and you tweet you have like tens of thousands of tweets. Not even once. I've hone in on immigration and not talk about commodification. So many tweets talking about the cultural problem. When you yourself admit that immigration is like this tangential thing, the papers that you read admit it's a tangential thing. Cameron Murray says,
let me just clarify. I've actually got dozens, if not hundreds of tweets criticizing the sort of cultural problem that exists in Australia, whereby people like basically see the property market as their main nest egg in the world.
I thought we agreed to be more civil.
I mean, I was trying to respond. I was responding to your accusation.
I was making a point. Well, no, yeah, but midway my point, right?
I was responding to your accusation.
You were complaining about me interrupting you when you were deviating from the point, and now when I'm specifically making a point about you,
I was directly addressing what you were saying. I was directly addressing into what you were saying.
Drew, why have you not said the word commodification once on your Twitter?
Because I haven't used that exact word, but as I just said literally minutes ago, I have dozens, if not hundreds of tweets criticizing the casino mentality that many people have in Australia. It's a cultural problem.
People like Leif and Onslow also talk about this. Doesn't mean they locate the problem specifically at commodification.
Because I don't see the problem as just commodification of housing, because I still think that a private property market should exist in housing.
But very clearly, this has led to the problem that we have today. Because even if you grant, even if you grant that immigrants are part of the problem, which I don't agree with, but even if you grant that, right, immigrants' role is still in the context of a heavily commodified private property market, right? So they're aiding and they're used as a tool to increase asset inflation under this worldview. I don't agree with this, but under this worldview, they're used as a tool to increase asset inflation. So clearly, the problem is you should locate the problem at commodification, at asset inflation, or all this stuff, right? But you never talk about it. You overwhelmingly only talk about immigration and housing.
What are you talking about? I've got dozens of tweets talking about asset inflation. I've got hundreds of tweets talking about that. And when I ran in the 2022 election, I literally had that as one of my major actual platforms here. You've tried to create a caricature of me that basically says that I'm the only person, the only thing I ever talk about is immigration, which is just categorically untrue. Because I said at the start of the only time you bring up things like asset inflation is in the context of immigration. I'm reading you so I can finish my point. I said at the start of this debate that there are multiple issues feeding into this.
But fundamentally, it's a problem of commodification.
No, it's not just fundamentally that. There's multiple issues feeding into it.
But the reason why, like, for example, immigration is under your worldview is used as a factor to drive up asset inflation. The reason why lowering interest rates, the flow of credit in the economy is so gargantuan, particularly with quantitative easing in 2021. The reason why is fundamentally those things wouldn't impact the housing market if houses weren't an asset, if they weren't private property, right?
Well, I still think that housing should be private property.
Fundamentally, then that's the issue, right?
No, it's not, because the issue isn't the fact that housing exists as private property, because there are so many countries in the world where houses exist as private property, but they don't have the same housing crisis that we have. Why is it the case that Australia in particular has this? Let me ask you, Adam, why is it the case that Australia in particular has five of its major cities in the top 10 most unaffordable in the entire world? Are we the only country on Earth? Are we the only country on Earth that has a commodification problem when it comes to housing? Of course not.
Oh, absolutely. It's a global problem. But I think Australia is unique in its history and how it's applied commodification, for lack of a better term, to housing. I think that we have in terms of history, we've always been a country of homeowners. We've always located home ownership as like a central tenet of the economy.
And I think home ownership is a good thing. I want more people to be able to own their own homes.
What happens to not interrupting each other?
Okay, sure.
What happens to not interrupting each other? I think home ownership, going back to colonization, the fact that our very first economic crash in like 1820s was derived from a liquidity shortage caused by speculating in pastoral land, our worst depression on record was caused by a crash in the property market in the 1890s. Like, our economy is so inextricably linked, uniquely in the world, to the commodification.
We're the only country in the world. We're the only country in the world that has a housing bubble.
That's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm saying we have a unique connection to it. Other countries have obviously, every country on Earth has commodified housing, has commodified land.
Every country on Earth. China has it. China has it as well.
But maybe not North Korea, but China. Yeah, China, absolutely. But I think we have a unique connection and a unique history. Based on what?
How do you say
hypercommodification in Australia?
What do you base this on? Where does this unique connection? Where's that coming from?
I've just explained it.
Just colonization. Australia had colonization, therefore it's a unique.
You're clearly not very good at listening. You're not very good at reading. You haven't read Molemi. You haven't read Cameron Murray. You didn't listen to what I'm saying. I'll say it again very clearly, okay? Australia has a unique history of colonization and land speculation, right? So part of
there are many countries that have that.
Oh my God!
There are many countries that have that,
bro.
Let him.
I'm sorry, Leo.
Please let him finish his point. Just Drew. I'll let Adu finish this point, and then Drew, you can jump back in, but I just want to make sure this full point gets clear, because as will, I'm sure, be repeated for hours, no one can hear either of you if you're talking over each other. Adu.
Okay. And I'd love to get back to the stuff that Drew dodged earlier, by the way. But in terms of colonization, right, the ways Australia did colonization is basically, for example, in New South Wales, you have the governor who would basically, under terra nullius, all land was declared as Crown land. And so technically the governor had jurisdiction over it. So what the governor did was allocate parcels of land for literally free or very low prices to free settlers who came, and convicts that then became free settlers. And then very quickly, banking institutions arose in Australia. What basically happened is that you had all this kind of unstable credit flowing around. You had people speculating on pastoral land, all this stuff, right? And in the 1820s, we had multiple liquidity crises surrounding the free banking institutions in Australia and the free settlers, because there was, well, partially anyway, it was also due to a fall in wool exports, but partially and largely because of this speculation of housing. So fundamentally, at colonization, we were speculating on the fuck out of land. Now, we want to go further into the history.
This has existed in basically every country.
No, that's not true. That is absolutely not true.
Yes, because Australia's not the only country that has speculative land. Okay, let me ask you this, right? Japan was never colonized, right? Why did Japan have a massive housing bubble in the 80s?
Because the housing's also commodified.
Yeah, exactly.
But
So we don't have a unique,
we
connection
do.
with
No, specific. That didn't happen in Japan, but other things did happen in Japan, which did, right? So, for example, and then the reason why in Japan it was a big problem is because they massively deregulated their banking institutions, their financial institutions in the 1980s, right? There's just because it happens in other countries doesn't mean that it's unique in Australia, and doesn't mean that there aren't other things that make other countries unique. They're not mutually exclusive, Drew. I don't know why you think this.
Sure.
And for the last,
I just disagree with you.
You aren't making specific counter arguments as to why Australia has a unique history of housing speculation, inextricably linked with colonization, and then later capitalist industrialization.
Okay, muting so I can ask you this. Why is it the case that
I'm sorry. Sorry, Leo. He's muting me so he can interrupt me. I'm sorry that you can't complain about. I'm muting me to interrupt me. That's ridiculous.
I think personally, and I'm saying this as the moderator who doesn't have control of the stream content, which was probably a bad idea in hindsight. There was no mention of muting prior to discussion. So, Drew, I am as moderator going to enforce the power. No one's moderating anyone. I'm going to ask people not to interrupt each other, but you do have the power while also debating. So I'm asking you, please don't exercise that and just continue. And just please let Drew get his point out here.
Yeah, or just one more final thing, because Drew kind of admitted this as like he before said that we have a culture of home ownership in Australia.
Yeah, we do.
And I bro, shut the fuck up. Oh my God.
I agreed with you. I was agreeing with you.
You can't complain about interrupting.
Just quickly get your question out to him.
Sure. I'd love to. You said that Australia has a culture of home ownership and I'm inferring here, but I'm assuming that uniquely has contributed to the housing crisis in Australia. Now, if you let me finish my point, that culture comes from colonization. Like there's a direct through line there, because Australia had uniquely high home ownership rates in the 1890s. This is a uniquely Australian thing compared to other cities like London, Paris. We had uniquely high single home ownership rates, and we had a uniquely very suburban and sprawled out cityscape compared to other cities like London and Paris, right? So like this is a uniquely Australian thing. That doesn't mean that other countries haven't had their own conditions or their own ways of hyper commodifying housing, but it just means that Australia has a unique history of it, and that's why we're seeing, in my opinion, that's why we're seeing a significant inflation in home values for the past 30 or 40 odd years.
So why did it get really bad, housing affordability crisis and rental affordability crisis? Why did it get particularly bad post-COVID once we've had this historically large level of migration to this country? Why did it particularly get bad? Was it just in the past 4 years? Was it just 4 years ago that everyone remembered, oh shit, Australia has a colonial history, let's all fucking jack up the prices? Or did it potentially coincide with the largest historic migration rate to Australia?
Is that seriously your counter?
No. Why did it particularly get bad 4 or 5 years ago?
Oh, we have a colonial history, let's jack up. No, I'm saying that we have a history and kind of embedded in the national psyche, and you yourself admitted it. That it's they have a culture of ownership. I'm just periodizing it. I'm saying where it comes from. You agree, and for some reason you have to be so contrarian because you can't refute a specific point. So you have to be contrarian on every little point, even though you agree with it.
I'm just asking you.
Ask me what?
Why did it get particularly bad 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons why I think the rental market got particularly bad. I think the housing market generally has kind of been on a steady trajectory of being fucked.
It's spiked, yes, but rentals have gotten particularly bad the past 4 or 5 years, and there has been a spike over just the past 4 or 5 years as well in property. So just explain that to us. Why does that happen? Why is it the past 4 years?
There's different answers there, because the rental and housing market are different. So, the home buyer market are a bit different. So the thing with the home buyer market is in 2020 and 2021, the Reserve Bank decided they're going to quantitative ease, pursue a policy of quantitative easing, which basically, in layman's terms, is when you increase the amount of credit flowing around the economy. Now, it's a bit more complicated than that, but fundamentally that's what it did, right? It increased the amount of credit flowing in the economy. We had no immigration in this country in 2021. Yet house prices increased, I think, by double digits at some points. So there's a reason, and again, in states like Victoria, for example, we've actually seen house prices decline since their peak in 2022. So again, it's not like a ubiquitous story of just since COVID ended, we've seen a massive upshoot in prices. No, we've actually seen variation. And the reason why we've seen variation is because housing is an incredibly, fragmented, sector. It's a very volatile sector. It's a very boom bust sector. So some markets will see booms, some markets will see busts. That'll be influenced by the amount of credit flowing in the economy. So it's hard to kind of predict specifically the way in which our highly commodified housing market will go in specific states. However, there's not a ubiquitous story here of house prices just inextricably going sky high after COVID. In fact, during COVID is when they went their highest under quantitative easing. Now, in terms of rents, one part of the story of rents is that we stopped the rental moratoriums, we stopped the rental rental controls, and that's why on the ACT, for example, we're seeing rents falling compared to other states. Another part of the story is that interest rates have increased. And so a bunch of cost inputs have increased. So obviously interest rates is one, but obviously electricity is another one. And so landlords have seen, okay, look, costs on my end are going up. I have to pass it on. Otherwise I'm not going to make the same amount of exorbitant, profits and rents that I'm making. So I'm going to increase rents to my tenants. Now, another side of it is, although it's not the central part of it, but another part of it is the lack of rental supply, or lack of rental, or I should specify the lack of affordable rental supply. And part of that, part of the story is I'm being very specific here. Part of the story is population growth. However, if you only take away population growth, the impact will be negligible.
Okay, particularly because why is the impact negligible?
Well, I just explained there's a range of other factors here that do contribute. So obviously the increase in inputs for landlords, the fact that
I ask you this?
The rental market was deregulated. So there's a bunch of inputs here.
Why is it that we restricted? So obviously we talked about quantitative easing before. In recent years, the supply of credit has been restricted a bit in Australia because obviously we've had interest rates going up. A lot of people were under mortgage stress. But for some reason, prices keep going up and rental affordability keeps getting worse. So why is it?
In Victoria, they went down. Well, you're conflating two things.
Not even that much. I mean, like in Victoria, it's kind of been flatlining as well.
No, it hasn't been flatlining. It's been falling. The property industry has been fucking going crazy about it. It's been falling. But you're conflating two things here: house prices and rent prices. These aren't the same thing. These are caused by two different things, right? So house prices, yes, in some cases they've fallen. Because of the restriction of credit, but the restriction of credit and because we have variable mortgages in this country, so landlords, when their mortgage increases, they have to up rents. So that's why rents increased.
Sorry, say that again.
So a decrease in the supply of credit will, in some cases, decrease house prices because people borrow money to go buy a house. But in the case of rentals, when the landlord already owns the home, when they own the home and they're paying off... Not
necessarily. Like a landlord might still, for example, have to be paying mortgages on it.
Drew, if you just let me fucking finish.
And there's a comment here, right? Like Victoria's down 2%.
Leo, I was about to fucking say it.
Yeah, let him finish the question.
If you actually let me finish, I was going to say when landlords own the property, they're paying a mortgage on it. If you fucking listen, Drew, they're paying a mortgage on it, right? And so when the interest rates increase and mortgages increase, they have to pass it on. They have to pass that cost on somehow. And so part of the reason why rents have increased in a lot of states, not all states, is because of interest rates increasing. But interestingly, now that we're seeing interest rates come down a little bit, rents across the board, with the exception, I think, maybe Perth. I might be wrong, but across the board, across every city, rent price growth is going down. So prices are still increasing, but price growth is decreasing in every city, or almost every city in almost every state. The ABC did a good article on it. But now that credit is, interest rates are coming back down, rent price growth is not as excessive as it once was. So clearly, it's not necessarily a problem of immigration. Immigration, again, has an impact.
Yeah, it has an impact. It's good that you recognize that.
I've literally, you can go to every one of my videos on this topic. I will always say that immigration has a measurable impact, statistically significant impact, but it's never a central problem, a central tenet of our issues with the housing market. And it's not
certainly one of the major issues right now. When
absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Okay. Can I just ask you this? Again, we have to talk about this. Would you agree right now that the current rate of migration to Australia is the highest in the entire 60,000-year habitation of the Australian continent?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. Hold on. In absolute numbers, yes. In terms of population growth, no.
I know, but what we're talking about, obviously we're dealing with absolute numbers here though, right?
Well, no, because absolute numbers, everything everywhere is increased in absolute numbers. So it's better to talk in proportions, right? It's like it's like talking GDP versus GDP per capita. GDP per capita is more representative of the population because it takes into account the proportion of the population, right? Whereas if you just thought, well, India has a bigger GDP than us, but India is not more prosperous than us, right? So in terms of absolute terms, absolutely, this is the highest amount of immigration Australia's ever had. In terms of proportion, absolutely not. It was much higher during colonization. I think it was a bit higher in the 50s, although it might have been similar. I think it was a bit higher, but yeah.
I mean, if we are dealing though in absolute terms with the most amount of people coming to the country every year.
Proportionally, it's not.
And we don't have the housing for these people because in January, for example, Alan Kohler of the ABC, Alan Kohler.
I don't care what Alan Kohler says. He's not an economist.
But he said that. Yeah, but he said that.
I don't care what Alan Kohler says. He's a journalist.
I'll let
Sorry,
you make
go.
Okay. Well, I'm going to continue.
What does Alan Kohler have to say, Drew?
I mean, Alan Kohler says that it was in January, the amount of demand in the housing market roughly outstripped supply by twice the figure. So this is part of the problem. There's just simply not enough supply of housing. And Addo's response, Addo's main thing is, well, we've got the houses if we just simply expropriate them. But that's not necessarily an acceptable policy for a number of reasons. One, I think just in general, expropriations are not a good thing. We want to actually have, we want to have private property in this country. I don't believe that we should just completely eradicate private property market. And furthermore, I mean, sorry, I got distracted by someone in the chat. But yeah, exactly. Like, it's going to cost a lot of money to expropriate 500,000 homes, 600,000 homes across many different cities in Australia. Also, and this is another point, a large number of these vacant homes, a large number of them are actually unlivable. Some of them have structural issues with them. Some of them would require massive amount of money to fix the property up. Also, part of this, we've got Purple Pingers, and Purple Pingers loves to cite that figure of, there's 1 million unoccupied homes in Australia on census night.
You're not talking to Purple Pingers.
Yeah, I know, but you was trying to make me talk for Cameron Murray. We've got he goes, 1 million unoccupied homes in Australia on census night.
Why are you making
census night? Census night is a snapshot.
I know we're not meant to disrupt, but Leo, can we get on the actual topic?
Somebody could go interstate for one night and their home is counted as vacant.
Leo, I'd love to actually, we're talking to me. So I'd love to talk what I say because I've never said that. I think bringing up the census numbers is problematic.
I'm very conscious of not wanting to make this discussion about Purple Finger says this, or look at some level. I get he has economist stuff, and we could again debate all night about.
Well, Alan Kohler, I don't really care what Alan Kohler says.
In relation to Addo's specific viewpoint, his specific point, do you have a question or a rebuttal to him and something he has just said just now right here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and again, when Adu talks about, price growth is abating, that's not enough. We actually need to see price falls. We need to see the price actually falling in the rental and the housing market.
House prices are falling in Victoria.
Yeah, by 2% or something like that. It's a really low figure. Okay, that's good.
So,
Sydney. Right, so Melbourne is still in the top 10. Melbourne is still in the top 10 most unaffordable cities in the world.
I agree. The housing crisis isn't solved. Look, I think it's really interesting that none of the arguments I've made have really been directly addressed by Drew, but we can go to solutions and specifically about that stuff if you want to. So you say house prices should fall. What? How much?
I don't know, probably to at least where it was before COVID, which may be a 30-40% fall probably is probably what's necessary.
So you think we would solve the housing crisis if house prices were what they were in 2019?
It obviously wouldn't solve the housing crisis, but it would be infinitely so much better than the current situation that we're in.
So how much do we need to solve the housing crisis?
I mean, we should make it much more affordable. Where it was 5 years ago, it was much more affordable than right now. Right now, we actually have crisis level unaffordability.
That's not an answer. How much?
I mean, if your solution is, we can address
here's an easier answer. Here's an easier question. What should the price to income ratio be?
I mean, I think it should go back to the levels, we saw. Ultimately, what we need to do is we need to go back to the levels we saw maybe 20, 30 years ago, where somebody could people could actually afford to buy a home on a couple years of saving rather than decades of saving.
So I assume you're referring to the 80s, because in the 90s and 2000s, that's when prices began to spike up significantly. In the 80s, in the 80s, house price to income ratio was 4.
Let's go back to 4 then. Let's go back to 4.
Which is still unaffordable, by the way, per the actual metrics. But
I mean,
it's hold on.
It's a lot better than what we've got right now.
Oh my!
Right now, it's like 13
I don't want to invoke
times.
you so much, but like it's.
No, please. It is my job that I got into. Adu, if you've got a question, and then I will let Drew get in a full response here, because the specific question was, how do we solve it, and where would you actually like to get prices down to? And I think that's a question that a lot of people here are wanting, and I would want as a young person. I think it's a kind of a defining question over it. So, Adu, if you have a very quick statement, but then Drew, I actually do want to get your full answer to it.
Yeah. So I agree. By the way. Oh my God.
I just said if we can let Adu get in, and then Drew, I will let you get your response. We'll make sure you get it in. But Adu, you have the floor.
Yeah, sure. So I agree that house prices are exorbitant right now, and compared to 1980s, I think that still price income ratio 4 is still unaffordable, but it's much better. I agree. So to get down to a price income ratio of 4, house prices would need to fall by above 70%. So is that something you're willing and prepared to endorse?
Look.
Okay,
obviously, obviously that would cause a banking crisis in Australia. I understand that's not feasible. I mean, we've got to somehow do something. What do you say? Sorry.
It's not just a banking crisis.
Yeah, I know. Yes, I understand. I mean, it's obviously a diabolical problem. And look, this is ultimately at the end of the day why both major parties both say, well, we need to have house prices going up. So, I mean, but you've actually said that 4 times is still unaffordable. So you would actually want to see it reduced by up to, I don't know. You're putting this on me.
Don't flip it on me, Drew. I'm asking you specifically. Don't.
No, let me ask you. What do you think?
You haven't answered. You haven't answered. You just pivoted. No, you haven't answered.
I gave you an answer. I first gave you an answer.
You didn't.
I said 4 times.
And I'll quote you verbatim here.
You raised the point. You raised the good point that would cause an economic crisis in Australia. I understand that. But you actually want to see it even worse.
Okay, so I'll quote you verbatim here. You said, yes, it would cause a banking crisis, but we've got to get it down somehow. So in our current capitalistic system, because you love capitalism, you love private property rights, how would you induce a 70% plus
Look, okay, then we can't do it then. We can't do it then.
Okay.
Let him finish.
Oh, my God.
I agree. We can't do it. Okay, I agree. You're right. We can't do it. We can't do 70%.
I think
agree with
Drew,
speak up because you know you haven't
still
answered
finishing the question. Adu, if you can somewhat quickly finish that question.
How would you induce you bring up Japan before.
No, it's a good point.
Please let him finish the question. Please just let him get to the end of this question. Adu, if you can, don't make it a long run-on question. If you can make it a nice, simple question, the floor is yours. And then, Drew, you can respond, but just let him ask.
Okay.
How would you induce a 70% plus decline in house prices, a central part of the economy in Australia,
without inducing, I agree with you.
Without inducing the worst depression on record in our country's history, arguably making it worse, making it harder for people to buy homes, but not just homes, buy essential goods. Like that'll be catastrophic.
Yeah, I agree with you. You're right.
Yeah, there's the question.
Okay, so you agree. So why were you just saying that that's what we need to do?
Because I should have qualified. I think in an ideal world, it should be ideally 3-4 in terms of income to income. I think that should be the ratio in an ideal world. I do. You raise a good point that we would have a massive crisis if we actually reduce prices by 70-80%. I mean, when I said an income ratio of 4 times, you said that's still unaffordable. So presumably you want to have house prices fall by more than 70%. You want to see it falling by more than 80-90%. What do you want to see it fall to?
Don't feel on a major house specific.
No, you have to answer that question. I answered it first.
I will. No.
I answered it, and then when you pointed out that it wouldn't be feasible to have a 70%. I actually am revising my position in real time, right? I said in an ideal world it should be 4 times. You said
so how do we get there?
But then you said that would require 70% drop in house price. I said I think about it. Okay, yes, we can't do that because obviously it would be an economic crisis in Australia. But when I said 4 times, it would be in an ideal scenario.
You're dodging. I'd love to get into what I think. I'd love to go to the policy prescriptions on my end. However, you still have dodged the fundamental question: is that because you think this is the ideal, how do we then get to that ideal? If you
I
think
know
it'll
it's a very difficult. It's a very difficult problem because you're right.
So
that
why
if
do you
we had a
masquerade
70%
as someone who has
it
the
will
answers, as
wipe
someone
out the country.
who can talk about, who blames immigrants for all our problems in this country?
I never did that. When did I ever say that? When did I ever say immigrants were the only problem in Australia? I never said that once.
Sure. I'll revise it. You disproportionately put your focus on immigrants in relation to housing.
Not even disproportionately. I'd say
yes, you do. Anyway, you're dodging again, Drew. How would you get to this idealized 3 to 4%, 3 to 4 income ratio, price to income ratio of housing? How would you get to it without inducing an economic crash?
I agree. It's a massive disaster.
No, that's not an agreement thing. How do you get there?
If I want to kind of just the question is, how do you do it without getting the crash?
How we can do it without how we can do it without causing massive economic crash? Cut immigration and increase the amount of supply in the economy.
That decreases prices.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm asking. I'm asking you. That's not an answer. No, I'm asking you. What will you do to combat the economic crash induced by decreasing prices? And your answer is, let's decrease prices. No,
we're going to have
economic crash is
I agree we can't do 70% overnight. I agree we can't do 70% overnight.
How would you combat the economic crisis caused by a massive drop in house prices?
Look, we would have to have a lot of I'm a Keynesian like when it comes to economics, I'm a Keynesian, so we'd have to have some kind of government intervention in the economy to try and stop people from falling into destitution. I mean, we'd have to have massive government public works programs, maybe put people to work building new homes. We'd have to obviously have a massive government intervention in the economy to stop a historic level of.
Wait, so now who's like massively expanding to say, how are you going to pay for it, Drew? Particularly if the economy's gone.
But as I said, Kate, as I said,
if the economy's gone in the bin, if the economy's gone in the bin, you're drawing less tax revenue. You're drawing less tax revenue. How are you going to pay for it, Drew? That was your criticism of my apparently utopian idea of nationalizing land in this country.
Well,
but now all of a sudden, now all of a sudden, you're invoking Keynesianism and saying, "Oh, we need these massive public works programs." So how are you going to pay for it?
Yeah, in the event of a fucking depression, of course we'd have to have public works programs. But yes,
but how do you pay for it?
There's like I would get rid of negative gearing. I would tax.
That's negligible.
Negative. But I'm giving you multiple things. Negative gearing. I would tax foreign investors in property. Do what Singapore does, where they have very high stamp duty on foreign nationals buying into the home. I would also put really high levels of stamp duty on people buying their second and third homes. So you might think that I'm this ultra economic libertarian. No, I actually do believe that there needs to be people buying a second and third home. It should be taxed. It should be taxed substantially. So I'm actually giving a range of prescriptions that are not ultra libertarian in economics, but. Let's decrease immigration. Sorry, what was that?
Do you know how much negative gearing costs the government?
Listen, I understand that it wouldn't be the fix all, and that's why I didn't even mention negative gearing until
how many property investors are foreign in Australia?
I know it's not the fix all. I said I gave negative gearing as one of like 5 different responses. It's 50 billion, something like that.
So negative gearing is $6 billion, the cost of the Treasury.
Per year? I mean, if you're talking about it
per year, that's nothing. For these massive public works programs to fix the housing crisis in the event of a depression, that's nothing on the federal level. Taxing foreign...
Okay,
what you call it? Taxing foreign... Taxing foreign owners of property. I thought you wanted to get rid of them. How would you tax them if you get rid of them?
How much do you want to see it reduced?
How are you going to tax foreign nationals if you want to get rid of them? If you want to get rid of the foreign nationals, how do you tax them?
But I never said get rid of all foreign nationals. I said decrease the number. I said decrease the number. Never once did I say 0.
No, foreign investors. Not foreign nationals. Foreign investors in the property market. I assume you don't want foreign investors in the property market.
There can be some extent. There can be foreign investors in the property market, but we should.
Do you know how many there are right now?
It is still a substantial thing. I can't give you the exact figure off the top of my head.
So this is like a plank of your policy, and you can't give me.
Yeah, well, I gave you, as I said, I gave you more than 5 different solutions.
What percentage of foreigners make up the property market? This isn't even foreign investors, foreigners.
Oh, look, I readily concede it's a small percentage, but at the same time,
1%. So you're going to tax 1% of people, of which you're going to get rid of. Some of which you're going to get rid of. You're going to tax 1% of home buyers to pay for these massive Keynesian public works programs that you were chastising me earlier for being unscrupulous and unrealistic.
Again, never once did I say that itself would be a silver bullet. I never said there was a silver bullet.
Well, negative gearing $6 billion. That's got to be less than $10 billion. Less than $10 billion is incredibly charitable, by the way. And what? Increasing stamp duty?
Someone has.
That's seriously going to. That's your serious solution to the massive depression that will be onset by decreasing house prices by 70%.
For fuck's sake, Adu, I actually said to you, let's not reduce it to 70%. I think as a first intermediary stage, we'll bring it. No, but then I revised it almost immediately when you pointed out it would be a disaster for the economy. So we should revise it. First we'll get it back to where it was in 2019, and then we can stabilize it for the long run, okay? I don't want it to go down to 70%. You said that a price to earnings income ratio of four times was still really expensive.
I'd love to get your what's your
percentage that you want to decrease?
Because you accuse me of being like a gay race communist or whatever, but or here you are now saying we're gonna flatline prices or whatever. So you're what are you in favor of price controls?
I literally said at the start of the debate. I said at the debate. I said at the start of the debate.
You're in favor of price controls to maintain house price growth to zero after you've decreased it by 40%.
I actually said I have a dengist actual outlook where I'm like, it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. The only thing that I've said is we aren't going to nationalize all land in the country, which is apparently your solution, which is impossible.
So you're not gonna nationalize all land. You're just gonna introduce price caps on the Australian property market.
No, I'm not going to introduce price caps. I would just have.
Well, you just said you did.
No. That's ridiculous. I didn't say we're going to put price caps on it. I said it should be a target of the government to try and keep house prices relatively. We're going to see houses go down a little bit and then keep it roughly stabilized insteed of seeing massive increases. Okay. And what?
I assume you've done the modeling for this.
Limit demand.
I assume you've done the modeling for this, right? Like you said, okay, these government policies will do this much. The house prices will mitigate it by this much. I assume you've done that, right?
Sorry, say that again.
Well, because you're saying, we're not going to do price controls. Okay, so you're not going to do price controls. So I assume you've got, a bunch of policies that you've costed, and you've got, okay, so once
you haven't got that. Adu, you haven't got that. You haven't given us.
We haven't even gone to. We haven't even
said nationalize 500,000 homes, and then you said, I don't.
We haven't even got to my. Well,
tell us how much
we haven't got to my solutions, which, by the way, I've talked about extensively on my channel. You haven't. I've talked extensively about what solutions I have.
Tell us. It's now.
No, but we're still talking. No, it's not, because I want to get you on this because you are squirming. You have no real solutions.
You're squirming. You want to induce. The ratio of 4 was too expensive.
Leo, I can't keep going if you keep interrupting me.
You said 4 was too expensive. So presumably you want to see.
Sorry, Leo. I know I'm giving you grief for it, but come on.
Presumably, you want to see houses.
I'm sorry, Leo.
More than 70%.
Okay,
sorry,
Drew,
I'm not
that's
giving
your question. Adu, did you hear his question? Or
I didn't hear his question.
He said that a ratio of 4 was too high. It would still be unaffordable. So presumably he wants to see house prices decrease by more than 70%. How much would he like to see them decrease in his ideal scenario?
Please let him answer.
I'd love to talk about this, but I don't think, Leo, with all due respect, I don't think he's sufficiently answered the question. Do you think he's sufficiently answered the question?
You haven't answered a single one of my questions, Adu. Adu, you haven't answered a single.
There's been a few questions. I think all our audience is getting lost here.
Can Adu answer a single question? He's not once said the amount that he wants to see prices fall in Australia. Please just answer that question, Adu.
Well, I don't think we should have a housing market with price signals.
Okay, so you want to nationalize that's wrong though. Okay, tell us why, because that would actually be with the entire middle class of Australia resting their entire net worth on that. You want to basically take that away from them. Tell us why that's acceptable.
Well,
why
that's also what you want to do, because you want a 40% decrease in house prices in the short term. So that takes away their future as well.
No, that's very different.
You're a communist with me here. You're drowning them. You're drowning them in negative equity, which is whereas
You're saying that they can't sell their home.
You're drowning them in negative equity.
That's a communist solution. You're saying nobody can sell their home on the private market.
No, I think people can I guess sell is the wrong word here, but we can distribute houses accordingly without using.
Somebody has taken out. Tell us what happens to somebody who's taken.
Leo, is it just me, or is he dodging the question, like the actual points that I'm making?
You're dodging my question. Tell us what would happen to somebody who's taken out a mortgage already from the bank. Suddenly they can't sell it to anybody ever again. I hate to be childish,
but I did ask you about your specific program or policies around this, and you can't answer.
No, dude.
The question seemed to be one of many, but it was about whether it had been modelled and what your specific program, your specific policy is, Drew. You've got the platform to say
sorry,
that.
Leo, sorry, just to really quickly interrupt. It's not even about the specific policy platform. It's specifically how he would deal with the crisis caused by a dramatic drop in house prices, whether it be 40%, whether it be 70%, right? That's what I'm specifically asking for.
Sure.
And
Drew, how would you deal with that then?
Okay, I would try and lower house prices, but I'd try to do it slowly and steadily so as not to induce an economic crash. I think that's much more reasonable than Adu's idea, which is to basically ban people from selling their homes on the private market. I want to know what happens to the people who have actually taken out, say, a $1 million mortgage. What happens to a family? No, I'm asking you a very simple question. Tell us what happens.
It's a whataboutism. No, you're going, oh, well, what about your solution, Adu? What about your solution?
I'm asking about you. There are millions of Australians who have taken out mortgages. What happens to them when they can no longer sell their homes on the private market?
I'm asking, and look, once you answer this stuff, I would love to talk about the decommodification of housing. Again, I've got a whole channel about it.
If you want to drop house prices by 100%, what happens? How do you stop a massive crash from happening?
Leo, look, he's not answering how specifically he would deal with a significant drop in house prices. He says,
I said I would slowly taper it. I literally said I don't want to increase the
price controls.
No, not by price controls. No, not by price controls.
How then?
You can simply turn off the pressure cooker that is high migration, and you can also increase the amount of supply in this market. So I would have policy prescriptions. I wouldn't do price controls because they're too blunt of an instrument.
Okay. No, this is great. I love this. So, you would somehow, through the free market in our incredibly boom bust housing market that it is right now, with a light touch.
Let me answer this. Melbourne has gone down by 5%. Is that not a result of Victoria's state policies, right?
Drew, we're at a point here where one response is getting interrupted by another response and another question. There's about 20 questions at this point. So, Adu, you're about to respond to what Drew said specifically. He just mentioned price controls, blah, 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 blah. That the discussion was had. Adu, your specific question, Drew, please let him ask it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so you wouldn't use price controls. You would instead rely on a soft hand of the government doing increasing supply and cutting immigration. Okay.
Well, okay.
Again, doesn't even talk.
Can I say something?
Okay.
But okay. You brought up before the fact that Victoria has seen about 5% decline in property prices over the past couple of years. Presumably, that's a result of their policy prescriptions, right? They haven't implemented price controls, but it's still declined by 5%. So that you're making out that it's impossible. You can't.
I don't doubt that. Okay.
Sorry, what was that?
If you let me finish, I don't doubt that it.
Okay, so it's possible. So stop strawmanning my position then.
Well, I can't possibly strawman you if you keep interrupting me, Drew.
Okay, go.
So. It is, and look, again, I keep saying it, but clearly you don't know what boom bust means. Boom, as in prices go up, bust, prices go down. So we have a highly volatile housing market that generally trends upwards. So, for example, Victoria is in its housing bust cycle right now. Now, the government's picking up the slack in some regards, but generally, yeah, Victoria's housing market's in the bust right now. But there's a fundamental difference here between, having policies which try and mitigate excessive price growth, and in this case, decrease house prices. But then having an attitude of, okay, well, generally speaking, you want the housing market to increase in value, right? That's the Labor Party.
No, that's not my policy.
Decrease
house
prices.
My policy. I think prices have to decline.
I understand that's not your policy. I'm saying that's the problem with your policy, is that the difference between you and Victoria is because you have an explicit program of house prices declining significantly for significant periods of time. And so when you have that,
I would taper it.
What do you mean you would taper it?
Because you're basically presenting it as though I want to basically overnight decline the house price market by 40%.
No. I'm saying like over time, if you do it over time, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you have an attitude and an explicit policy of decreasing house prices over, let's say, 10 years, you want to decrease them by 40% over 10 years, right? So 4% each year. Having that explicit attitude will fuck the market up, right? So over 10 years,
hang on, I'm just responding to a comment. You won't. Sorry, I did get the expression wrong. I meant to say gay space communism, not gay race communism. I meant gay space communism. That's the more common expression. Sorry, go on.
Well, I'm just saying that if you have an explicit policy of year-on-year price declining by, let's say, 4%, and so it's 40% over 10 years, you will still decreased confidence in the market, and every big housing crisis is precipitated by continual falls in house prices, right? It's precipitated by the delinquency, right? And so what you're doing is rather than doing it immediately, you're slowly drowning these people in negative equity, right? And so then you're going to cause a crisis that you can't control because you just said you're not willing to control prices. So you're going to cause a crisis either way. You're just prolonging it down. And every housing crisis it's followed by the peak, has the peak of house prices, and it's followed by a precipitous decline.
Yeah.
Right? That isn't that big to begin with. It's like a peak and the
Let me answer. Okay. I'm actually just shocked that Adu thinks he has grounds to talk about confidence in the market. Oh, there might be a run on the market. How are you going to reassure markets? Like, oh, you're going to drown people in negative equity. You just said before, Adu, that you think people should not be allowed to sell their homes. And I tried to ask you, what happens to somebody who has negative equity, who's taken out a mortgage on their home? And you said this, you just didn't even respond.
So what about him again?
No. I'm actually shocked. I'm actually fucking shocked, right? How does this even make sense? I've asked you questions. Why is it the case that you can ask me questions, I can't ask you questions?
Because Drew, you want to actually answer my question with your own question. That's called a whataboutism.
You want to confiscate people's main asset. You want to confiscate people's main asset.
What's a whataboutism? Can you tell me what a whataboutism is?
Okay. Can you tell me how you have the grounds to talk about confidence
you just did it.
and all this stuff when you want to confiscate people's main nest eggs?
Drew, when I ask you a question, typically you answer the actual question and not ask me a question about my own beliefs. We can get into that. I would love to get into that. I have a whole channel dedicated to it, right?
Let's talk
when
about
I'm asking you specific, well, I'd love to, but we have to get through yours first because I'd love to.
No, we've gone through mine. I've said we should slowly taper it off. We should have a mix of policies to increase supply and reduce demand. I've literally given you.
But how would you maintain consumer confidence in the housing market?
When I would do it slowly over time.
Well, no, your explicit policy is to have house prices decrease over and over and over and over again, even if it's by a little bit, like by 4% or whatever, over and over and over. Who's going to invest in housing if the house prices are continually decreasing? You bring up Japan. Japan's like the classic example of this. Japan's a classic example of home prices declining, yet home ownership rates declining as well, because people don't have confidence in the market.
Okay, as I said, we should only.
How would you mitigate that?
That's what Japan's doing. Say 40% of a 10, for example. I didn't even put a time frame necessarily on. I think long term into the future, we will let inflation in people's wages catch up with house prices, try and stabilize things by increasing supply and reducing demand.
And so how long? How much year on year?
Again,
how much year on year would house prices need to climb?
Can I ask one thing? Let me ask one thing. Why is it the case that you get to ask me about consumer confidence and investment confidence and stuff like that when your policy literally is to end the private property market? What happens? There was a comment before. Can you just answer this one guy? Answer this one guy, though. Answer this one guy.
I'm answering.
This one guy just asked, Adu, under your proposal, what can I do with the house that I own? What's your response to this guy, Johnny?
Wait, so which question are you asking me about?
I put it on the screen.
The question is on Twitter, Adu, and Drew wants you to answer. So we'll take this as a Drew question, and it's gone. I've still got it in the chat, which was.
So this is a question, Adu, under your proposal.
Adu, the question was, Drew wants to ask, is under your proposal,
your own
what can I do with my own house that I own?
Oh, it's your house. Whatever you want. It's your personal property.
But you said that people shouldn't be able to sell it.
Yeah, not as a commodity, but it's like a toothbrush. Like I can, it's
I
not.
don't get it. Okay,
You can't sell it as a commodity,
I mean.
but it's like your personal item. Like if you want to move out, you can move out. Like that's up to you. It's your personal property.
Okay, but who are you going to sell it to? You said you want to end the private property market.
I think this is pivoting from the fact because you can't answer, Drew, and I've given you an answer.
You can't answer either. You can't actually answer.
I just answered you. I just answered you.
And again, this is the crazy thing, right?
Leo, is that not an answer? What can I do? What can I do with a house of my own? You can have a dog in your house. You can, I don't know, buy a painting or whatever and hang up the painting. You can paint your walls red if you want to. It's your house. It's your personal property. There we go. Answered. Done. Now, Drew, please.
No, but you said that it shouldn't be personal property.
How, Drew?
You said that the government should own all land. That was your previous.
No. That's not what No. You're misconstruing my point. I don't think there should be a state. For the record, I'm a communist, but. I think that it's someone's it's their personal property.
I love this comment. I love this comment by Les
So,
you try to say to me that
Drew,
I'm
stop
not being
relying on the
particularly
chat.
specific,
Drew,
but
answer
magical
the question,
communism
Drew.
works for you.
How, Drew?
All right,
Drew, come on, man. Come on. We're getting down to it.
We're going
I've
back and
answered your
forth
question
here.
now.
I'm gonna look.
Well, Leo,
Adu, he
Leo,
gave a
with all
response
due
whether we like
respect-
it or not. Adu, I'm gonna give you the chance to ask Drew the question, which you've tried to ask Drew. I'm asking him. Just let him ask the question here, and if we can all kind of agree to stop answering questions with a question, that'd be great. Adu, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So Drew, you say, oh, we're going to have a slow, precipitous decline in house prices. Japan has had a slow, precipitous decline in house prices until very recently. And we've seen home ownership, particularly in younger demographics, decline substantially. Now, the reason is Japan similarly adopted a policy where they didn't really particularly care about upholding the property market, and they just built a ton of homes. And as a result, sure, home values have decreased since their peak in the early 90s. But as a result, consumer confidence and investor confidence has dropped off significantly in Japan. Now, in the context of a capitalistic society, you need those things to
I
uphold
still think
markets,
Japan is
right?
so much better
And
than
so-
Australia right now.
Oh, it is absolutely not. Japan is a terrible country
No,
for
it
housing.
literally is a lot better.
No, it's not. In what way?
I have an academic friend who recently.
I don't care about your friend.
He
Objectively,
wanted to-
home
he tried
ownership
to buy
rates
a
have
house.
fallen.
He tried to buy a 4-bedroom apartment in Fukuoka, one of the large cities in Japan, and it was about the equivalent of $200,000 Australian, which was about 2 or 3 times his wage. And the equivalent, a 4-bedroom apartment in Brisbane, was literally like, I think the cheapest I could find on realestate.com was $700,000. So Japan is doing a lot better.
Disagree.
It's so much more affordable.
I don't disagree that Japan's technically more affordable. You as an Australian
Much
can move
more
to Japan.
affordable.
It'd be more affordable. It'd be more affordable.
I mean,
for you.
the problem is
Hold on. Leo,
is that wages
I
haven't
can't.
kept up in Japan.
I'm sorry, Leo. Okay, in Japan.
Can I just quickly jump in? I'll let Ado ask this, but also someone's got Discord open, and I can really keep hearing it being pinged. So someone please turn Discord off. It has been heard all night. Ado.
Yeah, so Drew's got his Japanese friend that he talks to, and I've got the actual statistics where Japan's home ownership rates have fallen significantly in the past 10 years or 20 years or so. In the same time,
Okay, but rents are affordable there, so it's not that bad.
Oh my god!
Let him answer. Let him ask. Just
Drew, if it's affordable, why aren't people owning
let him
homes?
ask.
If it's affordable, why have home prices, home ownership decreased? If it's affordable,
rental
why
prices are much more affordable. Rental prices are a lot more.
No. Why is
there's
home
your question.
ownership? Home ownership.
All right, there's
Because
the question, Drew. I'm
renting
gonna
is so
let you
cheap in
answer.
Japan. Why would you buy a home in Japan if renting's so cheap and it's much more flexible?
Wait, so you think that people would rather rent and live under a landlord than
I mean,
own
not
their own
necessarily.
home?
I mean, not necessarily, but people have a lot more options in Japan because rentals are a lot more
Is that
affordable.
the future you want for Australia? Is that so?
No, it's not. I
everyone's being
want
rented?
high rates of home ownership. I want high rates of home ownership.
So clearly, Japan isn't the society for you because clearly the
not perfect.
stagnation and decline in the home
But
ownership
your
market
actual solution.
has curtailed.
Your actual solution.
Hold on,
Okay, but your
stop
actual
pivoting to
solution
me,
is renting
Drew.
without any
You
real
can't
ownership.
keep relying on me to justify your shithouse policies, okay, Drew? Japan's home ownership rate has fallen significantly over the past 20 years.
Slippery fish. You're a slippery fish because your actual policy is renting without any ownership at all. But then you're like, oh, but home ownership has gone down in your society. There wouldn't even be home ownership
We're
in your
not
society.
talking. I could be a social democrat right now. My points remain the same, right? So why in Japan has home ownership rates declined
It's because Japan, as Sid makes the point,
and why
I'm
has
answering.
house prices?
They're pivoting away from commodification of housing. Isn't that true, Sid? Why do you care about lower rates of home ownership?
Why are you talking to the chat, bro? I'm asking you questions directly.
No, it's an answer though. That is actually a funny answer. Like,
What, so you need someone else to answer your questions for you?
no. But there's an interesting.
Answer the question.
Yeah, I've
Answer the question. I don't care about the chat. Answer the question, Drew.
Okay. You, in your framework, it doesn't matter that home ownership has even gone down in Japan.
No. That's you're
your framework.
redirecting it
That's
to
your
me.
framework.
Answer the question under your framework, Drew. Under you. What would you do, Drew? Why? Oh, one second.
Well, I'm telling you straight up, Japan has actually seen less commodification, right?
Sorry, I was muted. I'll ask it again because you keep.
My dog's barking.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, fuck's sake. One sec. Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry, it's my dog. So why, Drew, why have the declines in in house prices in Japan not translated to higher home ownership rates? And if you say, oh, it's because renting is much more attractive now, well then, sure. Is that the future you want for Australia, where people are mass renting and no one owns a home?
Drew, you're muted.
You're muted, Drew.
No, I don't think Japan is a perfect solution because I do want to see high rates of home ownership in Australia. But you don't want to see
You
any.
just said Japan was like you said Japan was like what we should be aspiring to.
It's a lot better than Australia. It's infinite.
Home ownership rates are dramatically lower in Japan.
Yeah, but Japan is still so much better because they don't have 0.8% rental vacancies. They don't have.
They're not doing the thing you want. You want home ownership. You want mass home ownership. They don't have a mass home owning society.
I know, and so Japan's not exactly my favorite solution. I'm just saying it's.
So why do you refer it as why do you talk about it positively?
I just said it's better than the country we had in Australia.
It shows that your incrementalist approach about decreasing house prices doesn't work because it doesn't increase home ownership. So why would you apply it here in Australia?
I actually never said it was perfect. I just said it's a better situation than Australia.
Well, you invoked it. You invoked it because rent. True. We can walk through it very very slowly. We can walk through it very slowly.
Japan or Australia?
We can walk through it very, very slowly. Drew Pavlou wants home ownership to increase. Drew Pavlou positively invokes Japan as an example that's better than Australia in terms of affordability.
Well, it's better than Australia.
Japan has seen home prices declining for a few decades now, only to be very recent increases. Yet home ownership rates have declined significantly since the crash in '92. Then why does Drew Pavlou positively invoke Japan as an example that we should be aspiring towards?
I didn't even say that Japan should be the model society. I'm just saying it's a lot cheaper than Australia. Is that correct or not correct?
But they've done what you want. They've done what you want. They've done incremental price decreases, and look what they are.
Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal, but it's a lot better than what we've got right now in Australia.
So you would rather we have in Australia a mass renting society as opposed to
I don't. I want Australians.
So why do you positively invoke Japan?
Have the option to buy. I want Australians to have the option to buy. Again, I haven't said Japan is a perfect example. I'm just saying our situation in Australia is so bad that almost anywhere is better than where we are right now.
So would you want a mass renting society like there is in Japan right now?
No, I want a mass home ownership society.
But then why in Japan, where they did this incrementalist price decreasing approach, did home ownership fall?
Let me break this down, right? There's three tiers here. There's total unaffordability where nobody can even get into the market, right? Then there's affordability when it comes to rent. Then there's affordability when it comes to ownership. I would like to see homes more affordable to people. I'd like to see rentals more affordable to people. In Japan, it is more affordable for people. I'm not exactly saying that it's better. I'm not exactly saying it's a perfect fucking society.
You're not answering the question, Drew. You're not answering the question.
What's your question, Drew? Okay, what's your question?
I've said it like 5 times now. Okay. Why in Japan have home prices declined in an incremental way, what you want, yet home ownership has fallen as well, right? And so when you're proposing these solutions, like let's have an incremental tape it off.
It's a complicated answer.
If you have this tape it off incrementalist approach to price decreases, then why are you ignoring the bad example in answering Sid in the chat here? I'm not answering under my own framework. I'm asking Drew about his.
Well, you should answer on your own framework.
This is under Drew's framework. This is under Drew's proposals.
But
right? Under his worldview, Japan should be a failure. Japan should be a failure, right? Because and
it's
Drew's,
not a failure because it's cheaper than Australia.
Japan's failure should be a stain. Japan's failure should be a stain on Drew's policy, right? I can't keep doing this if you keep interrupting me. Japan has done what Drew wants, right? Japan has incrementally cut prices down, but yet home ownership has likewise fallen. So why would we want to emulate that in Australia?
I mean, you're just playing games because you're uncomfortable with the fact that you want to
answer the question.
Can't
make an argument. No counter argument.
I'm answering the question. Adu, if you actually want to end the entire private property market in Australia, why the fuck do you care?
Can't defend his own points. Come on, Drew.
You can't defend anything, Adu, because I'd
love to talk about it.
Your ultimate suggestion is to ban people from being able to sell their own homes on the market.
Yeah, here's an olive branch, right? If you say verbatim, I have no fucking idea what I'm talking about, and I have no substantive policy prescription to address the housing crisis in Australia, we can move
I've
to my
actually
point.
put forward values. I've actually put forward
Nothing.
ideas.
All right, nothing.
values.
All right, great. Well, let's
You
keep
haven't
talking about
put
you because you
anything.
can't answer the question. Why, in this example, where house prices have incrementally
no one even
fallen,
knows what your
and yet
question
home
is.
ownership is incrementally falling, why do you
Well, I
refer
actually
to
gave
this
you some answers.
strategy
It's a very
as a good thing?
complicated thing. For example, in Japan, there's much lower wages. There's been very low economic growth in Japan, and there's been very low wages. It's basically been stagnating for 30 years.
Do you know why it's been stagnating?
Part of the big problem was the housing bubble bursting.
Yes,
Japan.
yes, Drew, yes.
Yes.
So how would you
But
mitigate
let
that?
me explain to you. It's not at okay. Let me explain to you. Right, the bursting of the Japanese housing bubble is very scary for us because it could kill the Australian economy for 30, 40 years. I don't
Which is
think
what you
your
want.
solution.
You want that.
But I don't think your solution is better because your
No,
solution.
stop doing whataboutism, Drew. Stop doing whataboutism. This is not about me. This is about your framework. Your framework, Drew. So you've just admitted you want to kill the Australian economy for 30, 40 years.
No, I don't. What the fuck?
Because
are
you want to
talking
pursue the
about?
Japanese
What
model.
happened?
The Japanese model was incremental price declines in the 2000s and in the 2010s, right? And so as a result, home ownership has declined, yet you say you want a mass home owning society.
Yes, again, listen, the Japanese housing bubble bursting was a disaster. I would like to see that the avoidance of that in Australia. I would like to see that avoiding in Australia. I don't want to see that happen.
But how would you avoid it? How would you avoid it?
Well, again, we'd have to somehow taper down the
Somehow.
Okay, let me explain. Because your solution is magical communism. You don't even have a solution.
Again, you can't. Okay, Drew, again, if you admit that I have, if you say this, Drew, if I say you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, you have no substantive policy prescriptions, then we can move to my solutions, okay?
But no, I've given you substantial.
Say verbatim, Drew, that you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. You have no substantive policy prescriptions, and you spread misinformation constantly about.
No, I haven't. I said that Japan.
If you say that, Drew, Olive Branch, Drew. If you say that, Drew.
I said that the Japanese housing market is preferable to Australia because they have more affordable homes. But it's not.
I'm saying, Drew, they've pursued the strategy that you're invoking right now. I'm not saying you've brought it in. I'm bringing it in and saying, look, this is what they've done. They've done what you've wanted, and yet they've failed.
No, they didn't, because they didn't have a managed decline of house prices in Japan.
They did.
Yes. Let me explain. Let me say something. Don't interrupt.
They did have a managed decline.
I will let Drew make his point here. Drew.
Thank you. The housing bubble in Japan was so bad. It was so absolutely absurd and unaffordable. At one point, the grounds of the Japanese Imperial Palace in Tokyo were so expensive. Like in residential real estate terms, it was apparently costed at more than the entire state of California, just the grounds of the Tokyo Imperial Palace. So at some point, they had to have asset prices go down. They had to have it go down. We have to have asset prices go down in Australia.
So you agree with it?
Yes, but, and here's where I answer, right? Japan didn't have managed decline of the housing market. They had a bubble burst. They had a massive economic crisis. A massive bubble burst. I don't want to see a massive bubble burst. I would like to see a managed decline of asset prices in Australia. And that's more reasonable. That's more reasonable than your solution of abolish the market and nationalize all land in Australia.
Japan, what happened? Drew. What happened to Japanese house prices in the 2000s?
Again, it's been steadily decreasing. It's been steadily decreasing for a long time.
Is that not what you wanted?
Yeah, exactly. Again, but Adu, please know that when the Japanese housing bubble burst, it took down the whole economy with it because it happened overnight. Yes, it's been It
didn't happen overnight. It happened over a few years.
Yes, it's been happening for many years. I agree with you. It's been happening for decades now. But there was also a moment when the entire bubble burst overnight. That's what I want to try and avoid in Australia. That's more reasonable. That's more reasonable than your solution, which is magical communism, nationalize all land in Australia, and ban property transactions.
Drew, what happened at the peak of in 1991? Between 1989 and 1992? What happened to Japanese house prices?
Sorry, say that again.
Between 1989, roughly speaking, and 1992, what happened to Japanese house prices?
As you said, and it's gone down long term. There's
No. Between 1989 and I can tell you have no idea what you're talking about. What happened to Japanese house prices between 1989 and 1992?
Okay, you tell me.
So you don't know what you're talking about?
No, just tell me. Just go
right.
forward.
I'm glad we established that. They plateaued. They plateaued.
Okay, they
right?
plateaued. Good.
It's the first image on Google. You can look it up right now. Residential property prices in Japan.
Long-term decline and plateau. Okay.
They plateaued for a few years and then fell dramatically in the years following. And then between 1995 and I think about 2015 or 2013, they slowly fell. So how would you stop that?
Yeah,
how would you stop plateauing prices, causing a massive decline, and then the ongoing precipitous long-term decline?
I mean, look, the residential property market in Japan right now, it's still like 25% of what it once was. So yes,
what does that do with anything I said?
I'm answering you. Yes, there's been long-term decline in the residential housing market in Japan. That's what you want. Had to happen. Yeah, exactly.
That's what you want.
What had to happen?
That's what you want.
No, not necessarily. I mean, if in my scenario, there wouldn't have been a bubble.
You still haven't answered.
In my scenario, there wouldn't have been a bubble in the first place.
Well, you can't just disappear the bubble, Drew. We live in the bubble right now. So what would you do?
Yes, slowly manage asset price declines.
So they did that in like what, the mid 90s to the mid 2010s. And what happened to home ownership?
Let's just know within 1 or 2 years, like trillions in dollars was evaporated, just wiped out within 1 or 2 years. So Japan had a massive crisis, right? It wasn't just a managed decline over 30, 40 years, was it?
It had a crisis in 1992, but I'm saying that managed decline will inevitably lead to a crisis because people will stop putting their money into homes. And at best, people will stop putting their money into homes, and the home ownership, as we've seen in Japan, will decline.
Okay, but again, this is not an argument when
you're saying that falling home prices in Australia is what needs to happen to make people buy homes and increase home ownership, correct?
Sorry, say that again. I was distracted by the chat just then. Sorry, say it again.
Because the whole reason this came up is because you're saying that Australia needs to cut home prices, whether it be over 10 or 20 years or whatever, in order to get more people on the market and make it more affordable, right? To increase home ownership. Sorry, say it again. Sorry, I got my God, dude.
ADHD, it's fucking just...
Bro, I know you're a fucking idiot, but come on.
Drew.
Fuck off, retard. I got distracted for 1 second with ADHD. Just fucking go back to your point.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Okay, so prices decline, right? And
yes,
you're saying, okay, prices decline, home ownership can increase from there because prices are lower. Yet in Japan, we see a long-term
wage stagnation.
Well, it's not even in Japan, by the way. There's actually quite a bit of literature on this. There's actually a negative correlation if you look across all different countries in the world. And Huri, the Australian Housing Journal, talked about this. There's a negative correlation between home ownership and price growth, right? So when prices decline, home ownership declines as well. And that's not just the case in Japan, though. It happened in Japan as well. And it happened irrespective of the crash in 92, because theoretically, right, over the decades preceding, because the crash only happened for a few years, right? So the decades preceding, right, theoretically, according to your worldview, people should be, okay, homes are cheaper now. Okay, I can buy a home now. Let's go. Let's buy a home. But that didn't happen. Right?
Yeah, because
likewise, and it's represented in the rest of the literature as well, right? When home prices
Japan has also had population stagnation as well. That's a big factor here. Why has home ownership not gone up? There's less people in Japan.
No, home ownership is a proportion, Drew. It's a percentage.
Yeah, I know, so but overall,
no. That's another point, because it's a proportion. So the percentage of homeowners has declined, and that accounts for the population decline. So it's another point.
No. I'm just giving you multiple different examples why.
Japan no. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. The proportion, the percentage of Japanese homeowners, particularly in younger demographics, has declined, right? And that is a direct result of home values declining, right? And we've seen this replicated across the literature.
Okay, what do you want me to say?
So you admit that your policy is a failure because you want home ownership to increase. I'm about to say it if you stop interrupting me. You want home ownership to increase, yet the things you talk about and the things you want decrease home ownership. So it's a failure.
So managed decline of that. Okay, if you don't think that managed decline of asset prices is the right response, tell us what you think is the right response.
So you're conceding the point.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying we've been going over and over and over.
Either what you believe, that you have no idea what you're talking about, that your policies are unsubstantive, and that you're spreading misinformation. Then we can go to my policies if you want.
You go on to what your policies are. Do what your policies are.
Admit it. Come on, you have no idea what you're talking about.
No,
You're
it's clearly
insincere.
better because
You're
it's so
spreading
much cheaper
misinformation.
in Japan.
Admit it.
I think ownership is a secondary preference. The first thing is, should people be able to even afford their homes? In Japan, it's much more affordable.
So would you rather in Australia have a mass homeowning society or a mass renting society?
I would like, my ideal is a mass ownership society.
But it's clear that a mass renting society is more affordable. So why would you not want that?
Sorry, what did you say?
It's clear that under your own prescription that a mass renting society is more affordable. So why would you not want a mass renting society?
My ideal would be a mass ownership society, okay? My ideal
I understand. You've just repeated yourself 3 times. I've asked you the same question.
The crisis is so bad that my first priority before home ownership is just allowing people to even afford their rent.
Okay, so you want to induce a mass renting society in Australia?
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying
I have to constantly infer your answer, Drew. I have to constantly infer your answer.
We just want people to be able to even afford their rent right now.
I have to constantly infer your answer because you simply won't answer the question. You simply won't make it a coherent argument, Drew. So again, if managed decline is the pariah or the best thing you can imagine, right?
I would prefer if I could afford my rent on this place. I can barely afford it right now because rental prices are so high. If I could afford to rent, I would just rent right now because the asset prices are so high that I don't think it's even worth fucking getting into the market right now. That's my personal statement.
What does that have anything to do with anything I've asked you?
I do think that home ownership is an ideal, all else being equal. But affordability is probably the most important thing here. As somebody said in the chat, that's literally just a fact, right? The first step is people being able to afford where they're living. Okay, I'd like to be, me personally, I'd love to be able to own my own home. Right now, home prices are so high in Australia, I'd prefer to rent if I could afford to rent. I can't even afford to rent right now. So that's where we are at right now. And then you give me the offer of Japan, and Japan's supposed to be the worst society possible, but at least you can actually afford something in Japan, okay? I don't say that Japan is the ideal. I'm just saying at least in Japan, you can currently afford something.
Well, to be clear, since the GFC, rents in Japan have increased steadily. So it's not as if they're also stagnating rents or whatever, right? And as you said, real wages are very stagnant.
It's a lot more affordable than Australia. Just overall, it's a lot more affordable.
Well, price to income, again, a price to income ratio, it is lower because Japan had a crash, right? But just because they had a crash, again, you've considered the point implicitly here. The crash didn't make it easier for people to access housing.
Again,
right?
Which is why I don't want to crash. I want to manage decline in asset prices.
But even the managed decline after the crash in the 90s, the managed decline in the 2000s,
there wasn't ever really. The crash was so bad. This is my whole point the whole time. The crash was so bad in Japan that there wasn't even really a proper example. There wasn't even really a proper scenario where they could have managed decline because the crash was so historically disastrous. The Japanese housing crash was so bad historically. It's one of the worst cases of a disastrous crash in history. So you can have the worst crash in history and then say, oh, and then after that we did manage decline. But that's not even what I'm talking about. I'm trying to say, let's avoid the crash. We have to have asset prices go down, but we want to avoid a Japanese style housing crash. Let's have slow, over decades, managed asset price decline in Australia.
So why didn't home ownership rates increase after like a decade or so after the crash?
I don't know. The Japanese may have different...
You don't know. Exactly. Thank you.
But they may have just simply different preferences, okay?
Different preferences, seriously. So in the 80s, Japanese people magically had different preferences to Japanese people.
You were saying before, let me say this. You were saying before that Australia has...
Potentially true. Potentially, what would these different preferences be informed by? What would these different preferences be informed by? I'm trying to talk. You said before that Australia has this unique love of home ownership that's tied all the way back to colonialism. How do we know that that's not the case in Japan? Well, Japanese home ownership rates were higher in the 90s, right? So clearly there was some propensity to own a home, right? And so clearly people have wanted to own a home. People, I guess, younger people live at home with their parents, right? So something has caused this shift in attitude towards wanting to own a home. What do you think it is? Hint, it starts with prices.
I mean, the asset bubble compounds over time. People are compelled to join.
No, it's not. No. Stop. Answer the question, Drew. There was a managed decline in the 2000s, a decade after the crash, right?
Again, the crisis was so devastating for Japan that you can't even have managed decline after that crash. The crash is so disastrous in the first place.
Prices didn't go to zero, Drew. Prices didn't go to zero.
Anyway, Adu, we've been going for 1 hour and 54 minutes just on me. Let's talk about...
You want to answer the question. If you just answered and made a proper argument, we would have been done already.
Adu, you answer the question. You said that all national land should be nationalized. You said that we should expropriate hundreds of thousands of houses, and you said that people who own a mortgage shouldn't be allowed to sell their home as a commodity. So what's your answer?
I'm glad we can see that you
Bro,
have
you
no
don't know your answer. It's been
real
2 hours.
argument.
You haven't ever, you've
And
not
so,
defended
look,
one thing.
in the light of that, I will say, Drew,
2
if you
hours,
say-
you've not even presented one argument.
Drew, I have, by the way, but Drew, I haven't presented an argument, but then you just presented my arguments. Make it make sense, Drew.
No, you have not once presented your proposals for the economy.
So you just said I did.
Oh, you mentioned it in briefing, and then when I tried to get you to answer it, you just said, no, that's whataboutism. That's whataboutism. How about you?
It is, because when I ask you a question, Drew, you can't then pivot to my imagined position.
Let's move to Adu. So tell us, what's your solution? Tell us your vision.
I know you want to move the goalpost so much, Drew. And look, we can. If you just
what their solution is.
I'd love to talk about my solution. I'd have a whole channel about it.
Why do you refuse to present your policy? Is that moving the debate when I say, okay, what's your policy?
It is, because I'm asking you about yours, Drew. You can't just go.
I just spent 2 hours answering mine. I just spent 2 hours.
No, you didn't. The reason why it took 2 hours is because you refused to answer properly.
2 hours, please.
I'm conscious, Adu, that obviously there's many more questions that can be asked.
All right, yeah, that's fine.
But Drew has directly asked, what is your policy on this? I think it's a fair question. It's been asked in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
So the floor is yours to answer it.
So I think there's a lot of things to untangle. It's a very
I think Mick has been.
Oh my god!
You just
please,
not
Drew, you really wanted to hear his answer.
You're collaborating with neo-Nazis, are you, Drew?
So I'm gonna let him say it.
You're collaborating with neo-Nazis. Is
neo-Nazis? What are you talking about?
Because you just said Mika. Mika's a pseudonym I have that neo-Nazis think is my name.
Neo-Nazis? What neo-Nazi are you talking about? That's fucking ridiculous.
I know Percy's in your audience as well, by the way. Dude,
Percy has called for me to be deported, okay? Percy's actually called for me to be deported.
I just like to note that using a pseudonym that neo-Nazis think is my actual name, and just using it out of nowhere, by the way, just out of nowhere. It's really interesting, Drew. Really shows your allegiance. Getting information from neo-Nazis. But look,
Adu, your housing policy, Drew's asked it, chat's asked it, floor is yours. Drew, you wanted to hear it, so let's let him.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah, so I think what's called decommodification, which is separating housing from the commodity form, which is basically the situation we have right now, where housing is treated like an asset, something we speculate on. And so the way we do it, there's a number of ways we can do it. And I think, look, I'm particularly, I think we should build what's called counterpower, which is basically institutions and structures that exist outside of the current. Now, some people think that we should build it with the aid of the state. Some people, like myself, I think we should build it independently of the state. But let's talk about some concrete policy examples of what it means to decommodify housing. So, for example, in Uruguay, they had this thing called mutual aid housing. And basically what they did was they built a bunch of housing, and the state, which, by the way, it was a liberal government, by the way. It was not any kind of communist-y government. It was a liberal government. They established this thing called a land bank, and they loaned out, very cheap loans to these housing projects. They had advisors, they had staff that went into these communities and helped people build these homes. Now, you had two different kinds of homes. You had cooperative-owned housing, so you had a housing cooperative where the government lent money, helped out, all that stuff. And that was typically for the more middle-class, wealthier people who had the upfront capital to build put the money into the cooperative, right? Then you have what was called like sweat labor, or it's a different kind of, there's a specific name for it in Spanish, but basically, instead of putting upfront capital, upfront money into the housing cooperative, you would help build your own house, right? And so it covered labor costs. And so it was really interesting. The sweat labor housing cooperatives are actually run cheaper than the normal housing cooperatives. But that's one example, I think, that we can move towards, right? Where you have state institutions which are set up purely to help cooperative decentralized housing. And you can do that in a variety of ways, like in Uruguay. But you've also got examples in Germany right now. Again, I've talked about this extensively, where you have decommodified, decentralized housing, where you borrow from extraneous or non-banking financial intermediaries, so like credit unions, and and you distribute housing according to need, all that kind of stuff, right? And so I think, and look, that's just a decentralized, non-state interventionary kind of way of doing it. Of course, the more popular examples include like Vienna in the 1920s, when after the World War I, they massively increased investment into public housing, despite having a housing shortage, despite having their industry essentially destroyed after a war. And this was a pretty successful example of mass public housing, of a society of mass public housing, which was informed by, whether it be trade unions, the Social Democrat Party, all that kind of stuff, right? And housing was distributed according to need. It was planned with like local councils, with all that kind of stuff, right? With trade unions. There's lots of examples of trade unions, for example, and workers directly, working people directly building housing for need. I mean, you want to, for example, the Builders Labourers Federation in Australia made a big point about how we don't want to build housing and sky rises and nice fancy offices if we aren't building like hospitals and homes first, right? Even in New York, you had like some of the housing projects there that still exist today, which aren't in tip-top shape because of neglect and whatever, right? But back in the day, these were good homes for working people, right? So I think there's numerous ways we can go about it.
I mean, again, you present the Uruguay model. Is Uruguay the perfect scenario? I mean, this is what you were doing to me when I just said, let's have slow managed decline of asset prices when it came to Japan.
I didn't. I brought up Japan because they did what you're saying. I didn't say you brought up
very
Japan.
funny. It's also very funny because
you're just going to move past that? No, that's a false equivalency, Drew. I brought up Japan. I brought up Japan because they're an example of managed decline failing. I didn't say that you're bringing them up. Or you did bring them up favorably, but in a different way. But I'm saying, you interrupted me before, man. I'm saying that managed decline failed. And you didn't provide a successful remedy for it, right? And I didn't say Uruguay is perfect. I'm saying that's a model we can maybe build upon, right?
Okay, so in this scenario,
I don't think any country is
everybody's house. In this scenario, the CFMEU holds nationwide strike, says we're not going to build anything other than residential housing until that's allowed. Like, is this what you think is a good idea?
Is that seriously what you think? I
mean, you were talking about these national level unions who basically said we're not going to participate on construction of luxury housing.
Again, no idea what you're talking about, Drew. This was a New South Wales BLF initiative, not a national BLF initiative. In fact, they came into conflict with national BLF. So no idea what you're talking about, Drew. But I think that I think unions should throw their weight around in terms of providing essential infrastructure before the more speculative or other bullshit, right?
And it's just funny as well. I mean, as well, the sweat labor.
Use one example. We can use one example right now, right? Yeah. So, for example, I live in Melbourne. Hold on. No.
I'm answering. I'm responding to you.
No.
I'm responding to you. Let me respond. When we talk about sweat labor in the case of Uruguay, all the people in the cooperative, they're compensating for their building costs. I mean, are we going to be paying them the award rates? Are we going to be paying their superannuation, all this stuff? How are we going to do this in the framework of your cooperatives?
So in Uruguay, they don't get paid because they own what you call it? It's like a sweat. Like when you work for a company, and instead of getting a wage, you get a stake in the company, right? The stake is the housing cooperative, or the house rather.
Yeah. Okay. So beautiful. So the people.
It's mutual aid.
Building homes won't be paid in your scenario. This is going to be cooperatives, and people will be able to. I mean, at the end of the day,
paid with their home.
They don't. Yeah, but they don't even own the home though, because it's ultimately owned by the cooperative. No.
Well, okay. Well, clearly you haven't done your research.
I read this. I googled it. Once construction ends, the members do not own their individual units outright, but retain collective ownership through the co-op.
Where is this?
This is the Uruguay model, the sweat labor cooperative.
What website? What website?
Just Google it, man. Once construction ends, the members do not own their individual units outright. They retain collective ownership.
What did you Google?
This is the same with kibbutzim. This is the same.
What did you Google? What did you Google? Because I want to see specific.
Uruguay sweat labor cooperatives model.
Sweat labor cooperatives model.
I love this comment. This is unpopular. Imagine telling somebody,
dude, you're not referring to the comments. Oh my God. Shut the fuck up, bro. You can't stand on yourself. far out. So the first thing that oh my god, the first thing that came up was a paper. Is that what you're referring to? The exploring the conditions of the emergence and sustainability.
Just ask ChatGPT. Do people
wait, you asked ChatGPT. Is that seriously what you just did? What are you referring? What are you referring to?
I'm saying to you, if you want to have,
what are you referring to? What's your source? I'm just asking. I'm not even. I'm asking you. I'd be willing to concede the point if you just tell me your source. If you just tell me your source, I have an answer.
Outright, right? They retain the ownership through the co-op, but they don't own it.
What's your source? I'd be willing to concede this if you have a source, because I have an answer to this.
I googled it, dude. I googled it.
The first thing so it's the paper exploring the conditions.
Type in the Fuchs van model on Google. The sweat labor model.
So now I'm looking up another thing.
I'm googling it. I'm trying to find the same thing that I found.
Wait, so you don't have an actual thing? You just lied. You just lied.
No,
you just lied and said you did. So wait, so what was your source? What is your source for the claim? What is your? You just said you had it. So what? So you had it, or you're trying to find it for me? Which one?
I'm trying to find the exact one that I found.
So you didn't have it. So you lied, Drew. Why do you lie?
No, I didn't lie.
You have nothing to stand on. You did. You just lied. Am I fucking mishearing? Am I mishearing? Did you say Google it? You'll find it. Where is it, Drew?
Yes, the Federation of Uruguay de Cooperative de Vivienda por Ayuda Mutua.
Where do I look up?
Okay, you don't even know. Okay, tell me in your model. I'm asking you. Tell me in your model.
So what, Drew? You just made it up, bro. Come on.
I didn't make it up. I didn't make it up. I found the source.
By the way, Drew, I can agree with you, by the way, because some housing cooperative models do that, and I think that's bad.
Yes.
But I think there's a certain. But hold on. But you specifically, where does it say that the Uruguay model does that?
I'm trying to find
what source. So you lied. You lied. You don't have it.
No, I didn't lie. For fuck's sake, I didn't lie.
So wait. So you said Google it, Adu. It's there. Where is it? What is it? You said you had the source. So you didn't have it. So you didn't have it, Drew. Come on.
No, I have it, but I'm trying to find the
exact one. You didn't have it. Where is it then?
Okay, I found it.
Where is it?
I'm sending it.
What's it called?
I'm sending the link in the chat.
There's a really easy fix to this, by the way, and I think this is a limitation to some housing cooperatives. I agree, but I'd be really interested to see specifically where it says this about the cooperative model in Uruguay. Which, by the way, it could be very much so. I'm just really interested about the source, which Drew clearly doesn't have.
Mm.
And by the way, I just before when Drew's looking for it, I'll just say I don't think the cooperative model is like the ideal end solution. I think that's a stepping stone to constructing Counterpower, right? So I think that's a stepping stone to get there. I think that's part of the way getting there. I don't think that's like the end solution because ultimately it's still to a degree rely.
I've actually cited at least one source. You haven't even cited a single source the whole time.
Wait, I don't know what the source is, Drew. You haven't given it.
I sent it in the chat. I sent it in the chat.
What chat?
The link, the YouTube chat. The link is there in the YouTube chat right now.
I'm not on your fucking stream, bro. What? Just.
It is on StreamYard. If you click on chat and comments, you should be.
I'll literally send it in StreamYard. Hang on 1 second. I'll send it in the private chat in StreamYard.
All right, I got it. So where does it say in this one that? Where does it say specifically that it's owned by the?
Just do Control F in the document. 55 pages. Type in do Control F for collective ownership.
Full collective ownership?
Permanent collective ownership of property by the cooperative. The cooperative is the sole owner of the housing stock and communal areas. The houses cannot be sold to cooperative members or to any other buyer. Oh, Drew didn't have the fucking source. I knew I had the source. So I've actually now provided more sources than you have in the entire 2-hour debate.
All right, yeah. So it says here. So yes, hold on. So by the way, I did preface this by saying it could be very well true. I'm just interested in the source.
Exactly. So I don't know why you made the whole thing. You made the whole big
because
thing.
you lied and you just.
No, I didn't.
It's lucky.
I did it. I did a quick
post-hoc rationalization worked.
Let me explain. I did a quick chat GPT, which actually is
quite
accurate. Which is actually quite accurate because as we found here.
No. Hold on. So you did use ChatGPT. You did use ChatGPT.
What's the problem? It actually was accurate here. It was actually accurate here. It's accurate here. But it's actually
you have to use AI to help you in a debate. That's crazy. Yeah, you have to use it.
Guys.
But hold on. No. Yeah, I'd love to talk about the model.
At the top of my head.
Because
you brought it up.
No, but you brought up the Uruguay model. I wanted to learn more about the Uruguay model, so I researched it. What am I supposed to do? I don't have the Uruguay
You
model.
researched it by going to ChatGPT. Okay.
I just
no,
asked,
I mean, I'd love to talk about
I just said,
there's two counterpoints that
I literally just said,
Leo, there's two counterpoints I'd love to go to.
all I said is,
there's two
like direct
counterpoints.
I literally just asked, when it comes to the Uruguay model, is there individual ownership? And it said no. And then the source account backed me up.
Joe. All right. Just. I was not anticipating this to go for, what are we at? 2 hours 10 minutes. I am a school student. I do have a school night. It's
lyrically, I know. I'm sorry, Leo.
So
I'm sorry.
I might have to dip, but I'll leave everyone with this. I'll let Adu come in at this point. I'm going to go. So consider the first 2 hours the moderated part. Very well done. So Adu, I'll let you go on your point, but you boys have fun. I'll leave you to it.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you, Leo. I'm sorry. Thanks, Leo.
Yeah, you're good.
So if you scroll down a bit to where is it specifically? I think it has the title of the property, so that the cooperative owns the title, but the property is self-managed by the people.
Okay, but you can't sell them though. As I said, you can't sell them.
Sorry, say again.
I mean, you can't sell them at the end of the day.
Well, wait, do you think these people live in these homes permanently?
I mean, yeah, but what if somebody wants to leave the home? What if somebody wants to become? What if somebody doesn't want to live?
Wait, so do you seriously think that these people live in these homes permanently? Like, no one's ever moved out ever?
No, obviously people can move out.
Of course they have. So there's a way, just because
it's obviously much more cumbersome. It's obviously a much more cumbersome process than just owning the freehold title to the land. Correct?
No, it's just a different process.
But it is a difficult process because you can't sell it. You can't even just sell it to somebody else in the cooperative. So presumably you'd have to work with the cooperative to find a reasonable solution to be able to transfer the home to somebody else and be reasonably remunerated for that. How do you do that?
They already do it.
Yes, they do it. But can you actually explain to me how they do it? You just answered
your own question.
No, they do it. But how do they do it? And is it more convenient than the current system of freehold title in Australia?
Well, I'm not so much if it's like a slightly
so you don't
more convenient.
Oh my God, Adu doesn't know. That's what you've done to me the past 2 hours. I'm not expecting you to know that off the top of your head.
Okay, all right, Drew.
I'm not expecting you to know that off the top of your head. But
I do. I know. No, Drew. Wait, hold on. No, I was about to answer, Drew. Drew, I was about to answer if you didn't fucking interrupt me.
Okay, do it.
Are you okay? Do you need a breather? Because you keep raging and interrupting me.
Go ahead.
Okay. So clearly they do it, and you just said they do it, and before you're like, oh, these people can't do it. Oh, what? And then now clearly they are doing it. Okay, well, they negotiate with the cooperative, obviously, and they negotiate with people who are interested in buying or in taking the property.
Okay, how are they remunerated for example, the labor they put into constructing the house in the first place?
Because they own the house.
No, but as you just mentioned, as we just talked about on that source, it says that it is held collectively. They don't individually own it.
No, the title is owned, but they self-manage it.
Okay. But let me go back to the source because I'm pretty sure. Let me just have this here. 1 second. Collective
it's
ownership.
Really interesting though, because I mean,
okay, let me say,
we can go to different.
I'm reading this now. The cooperative is the sole owner of the housing stock in communal areas. The houses cannot be sold to cooperative members or to any other buyer. Households make repayments on the loan and provide labor for the construction of the housing units, each contributing an equal number of hours, regardless of which house they will then occupy. When they leave, however, the unit is returned to the cooperative, and the family receives back the value of any repayments made as well as payment for hours work, but without an increase in the market value of the house. A special monetary unit called the readjustable unit is used to establish the value of the loan and repayments over time. The cooperative then allocates the house to new members who in turn provide an equal payment. I mean, that's a cumbersome process. Would you agree that it's a cumbersome process?
No.
Why? Do you think people in Australia want to do that? Do you think people in Australia want to do that instead of what the current system is?
Wait, just because it may be electorally unviable. Again, you keep turning to this because you can't defend the practicality point. Just because it may be electorally. Hold on. No, Drew, shut the fuck up, Drew. Shut up, Drew. Just because it may be electorally unviable doesn't mean it's not practical.
Not electorally unviable. Right? Would it be popular for people to do? You could start a cooperative now in Australia. There's nobody stopping you. There's nobody stopping you from doing a cooperative right now in Australia. So why aren't people doing that now?
Well, there are cooperatives in Australia, but I think it's just...
What percentage? This is what you've done to me the past 2.5 hours. What percentage of people are in a cooperative right now in Australia?
I think it's less than 2%.
Okay, so obviously it's not that popular, is it? If it's only 2%.
True. if I think, oh, we're doing something bad right now, I think we should do this thing. That implies that we're not doing this thing right now. Obviously.
Okay. Yes, that's what I said.
Fucking obviously, Drew. Obviously, it's not being done right now. That's the whole point. If it was being done right now,
but there's no legal impediments. There's no legal impediments to doing this. So if it would be popular, why don't people just do this already?
I never said it's popular.
Then why do it? If people don't want this system, then why do it?
Wait, do you think something being popular makes it good automatically? That we should do it?
No, but I believe. Okay,
yeah. So
I believe that economic decisions should be made. I believe that the economic decisions should be made based on the individual's interests, right? If no individuals want to go into and create a fucking cooperative, even though they could voluntarily do it right now in Australia, why do it? I believe in democracy. I believe in democracy. I believe that people should be able to make their own decisions, not just made by the fucking cooperative.
You know what the cooperative is, right?
Yes, a cooperative is voluntary. But my point is this.
No. Who makes it the cooperative? Who makes a cooperative?
I don't. You could do a cooperative right now. You could
who
do
makes
it
up these committees? Right now.
Sorry, say that again. What are you trying to say?
Wait, so you're saying you want to do what the people want, not what the cooperative or committee does. Who do you think makes up the cooperative?
I'm saying what individuals want to do. It's not what individuals want to do. Right now, individuals.
And who do you think makes them up?
Cooperatives, but people are not doing it right now.
Democratic. You're democratizing home ownership. Private property is autocratic.
What structure do you live under?
Cooperative models are democratic.
Do you live with your family, and do your family have a privately owned home?
They do have a privately owned home.
Okay, why don't they live in cooperative?
You are pivoting fundamentally from a point of popularity.
Is your relationship popularity? What's your owning relationship with your parents? Is it a cooperative?
It's not, but that's irrelevant.
Okay,
it's irrelevant to whether a model works.
Why don't you do a cooperative right now?
Because it's not viable in Australia.
But
it's not viable for me right now.
There's nothing legally prohibiting. Nothing's proper. You could find 50 of your friends and just create a cooperative. Why don't you do that?
Drew, I think this is really interesting that you're like honing in on me specifically what I'm doing when you can't actually shut up. You can't actually address the specific policy and the this. You read it out yourself. You read out how specifically they exchange homes, right? So like there's in terms of practical, I'd agree. It's electorally in terms of popularity, it's a high mountain to climb. But guess what? Like I think that's fine. I think yes, that's the work I have to do and the work we have to do as people who want change in society. We have to change people's minds.
2006. Right? From 2006 to 2015, house prices in Uruguay rose at an average annual rate of 11.9%. More recently, newly built houses went up 13.3%. Gee, in the society that has the sweat labor cooperatives, that's interesting.
Well, clearly, again, you're not very knowledgeable on this specific topic because Uruguay and Uruguay still has a commodified housing market. I never claimed that Uruguay has a decommodified housing market. I said certain sections of it are in the beginning phases of decommodification, and it's a relatively small section of it, but it's still in terms of raw numbers, a very large amount of people. But the whole Uruguayan market is still commodified, Drew. Again, you're putting words in my mouth and you're leaning on comments because you can't make a specific counter argument.
Why? But there's no legal impediment to creating cooperative in Australia.
This is not a counter argument. This is not a counter argument. It's not a counter argument, Drew. It's not a counter argument. It's not a counter argument. Make a specific counter argument to the point about how effective cooperative housing has been at providing affordable housing to people in Uruguay, in Germany, in Austria.
This is what I'm saying. People have the option to create cooperatives right now, but people aren't doing that. That shows that people don't want to do that.
I agree. People don't want to do it right now. That's the job of getting people.
Why should we do it then? If people don't want to do it, why should we do it?
Do you think white Australia was a good thing?
I don't believe in race-based discrimination.
Okay, but that was a popular policy in like the early 1900s, and you as someone who is against white Australia, you would have been like, hey, we should be like, we shouldn't like do race-based discrimination, and then someone would be like, well, why would we want to do that? No one wants to do that.
Talking about policy, I'm asking, like right now, there's nothing legally prohibiting. But no, nothing legally prohibits somebody from creating a cooperative. You even said earlier that 2% of Australian people are in cooperatives. So there's nothing. Just like
there was nothing legally prohibiting people to vote for politicians or be politicians that were anti-white Australia.
What does white Australia have to do with it? That's a non sequitur.
Because you're saying the reason why the cooperative or the decommodified, the reason why you're saying that the reason why decommodified housing doesn't work is because people aren't doing it right now. Transport Drew Pavlou back to early 1900s Australia, and they would have been like, well, people don't want to do it right now. Even though it's perfectly legal for you to campaign against, to be a politician against white Australia. right?
There's
It's perfectly
nothing
legal to do
prohibiting
that.
people from doing cooperatives right now. You're comparing to race-based discrimination. There's not race-based discrimination.
There was nothing prohibiting people like you to campaign against race-based discrimination in the early 1900s. But the vast majority of people thought it was a good thing.
Australia is the same as Uruguay already. We both have commodified markets, but in Uruguay there are more cooperatives. So why are there no cooperatives here?
I think there's a myriad of different reasons, in terms of culture, in terms of how we're brought up, in terms of governments being different. Uruguay has a very different civic history compared to Australia. So I think there's a lot of different reasons.
Okay, but again, I'm not even making the appeal to popularity.
But the point of change, the point of changing society is the point that you're changing society. Currently, society believes this. I want to change it. Yes, I acknowledge people don't. That's the whole point.
People don't want it. Why?
Well, it's not that people don't want it. They just don't know that they're not aware. Or they're not.
Go out into the street. Social Alternative are in the streets every single day in the CBD, handing out their shitty literature.
Well,
go out into the literature, tell people that's cooperative.
Socialist Alternative and I have a different view on housing and politics.
Sure.
But just why not? That's what I'm doing, Drew. That's what my whole account is for. It's about promoting these ideas. So yes, I'm doing it.
This is just the same.
So this is a ridiculous. This is a ridiculous misdirection because you can't actually address the arguments. Because you're saying you're putting the onus on my responsibility or whatever.
Okay, tell me why
putting the onus.
Why?
Because I told you before, we need to decommodify housing. I just did. If you were listening before, I've done it numerous times. Because the commodification of housing has led to our housing crisis.
So now there's a myriad of reasons, but Japan home ownership is only based on one reason.
You're reading comments again, Drew.
No, but it's a good question.
You can't make your own argument. You're reading comments again.
But you don't even have an argument.
What is it to do?
Okay. I ask you, why should we decommodify?
You can't copy what I say and make it work. I've made specific prescriptive policy arguments, right?
Tell us why. Tell us why it'd be better.
I just did.
Okay, you said we needed to you said let's decommodify the housing market. Okay, sure. Tell us why we should do that.
Because the commodification of housing is causing a housing crisis.
Okay, why? Okay, sure. What if it's not?
What? Sure. What if it's not? That's not a counter argument, Drew. Make a counter argument. Come on. Drew, you're weak. You're weak, Drew. You can't make a counter argument. You are weak. You have zero in terms of counter arguments. What?
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sure is affirmative. You're affirming my argument.
You're not even explaining. You won't even say.
I just explained. You can't even question correctly, Drew, let alone make a counter argument. Okay.
Tell us why co-ops are the right response to the commodification of the Australian property market.
I think they're one way, and specifically.
Also, let me ask you this. No.
You asked the question. I'm going to answer it. You asked the question. I'm going to answer it. You asked the question. You asked the question. I'm going to answer it. You asked the question. I'm going to answer it. You asked the question. I'm going to answer it.
You call me out for taking comments. At least the comments are public. You're getting fed stuff on Discord. We all heard the Discord notifications before.
Those are I have headphones on, Drew.
Sure.
Even if I was getting Discord notifications, you wouldn't be able to hear them because I have headphones on. You fucking idiot.
Okay. Anyway, you asked me for 4 or 5 different policies. Tell us your 4 or 5 different policies.
I've been trying, but you keep interrupting me, Drew.
Okay, tell us.
Tell you what.
Tell us exactly why co-ops are the right solution to the housing crisis in Australia when they're not popular.
I think specifically. The type of housing cooperative that I'm proposing is a step towards a better future because you're constructing a new society, one of mutual aid, one of, decommodification in the current, and hopefully at some point we can move that towards a kind of like a counter-structural, counterpower. That's the word. And eventually, hopefully, we can incorporate and develop enough people into the counterpower to then hopefully dismantle the current power.
You're giving examples of market economies, like Uruguay is still a market economy.
No, I was referring specifically in certain sections of the Uruguayan housing market where a model is something.
Why can't we have it in Australia?
I'm invoking specifically certain parts of the Uruguayan housing market, not the entirety of the Uruguayan housing market, because obviously it's still a commodified market, right?
Here's this question by Sid. Decommodification entails...
You can't, Drew, come on, bro. Answer,
but you should respond. You should
make
respond
your own argument. You're relying on, I'll happily talk to
It's so funny that,
right?
it's
but
so
I'm
funny
talking
that
to
this
you,
is true.
Drew,
This is true.
and this is why
Let me
I
say this.
wanted to get other people in this debate,
Okay.
because you
Okay,
know for a fact you can't stand in your own two feet, because you're shit at debating. You have no good ideas, and you know you're being insincere about it.
I gave you more than 5 different potential policies that you could follow to hopefully eventually have affordable housing. And you were like, oh,
you said,
how to do it? And then when I asked you,
you said, oh, like we might decrease house prices like slowly, like. Drew, you haven't like followed up anything about what I've said. You've just gone, sure. What if it doesn't? That's not a proper counter argument, Drew.
Okay, but because
that's the only thing you said. The only thing you said, and just then.
The reason I asked such simple questions is you didn't even explain from a basic argument.
It's not a simple question. You went sure, you affirmed the argument. You went sure, affirming the argument, and then you went, what if it doesn't? Like, that's not an argument, Drew.
Tell us what is blocking the creation of housing co-ops right now.
I think we have a hegemonic culture, a cultural hegemony in Australia, which promotes detached home ownership. It promotes hyper commodification of housing. It's embedded in every institution in our country. It's embedded in education. It's embedded in the household. It's embedded in politics. It's everywhere. That's why. And now, look, this is really interesting, Drew, because I answered you specifically before, Drew. I answered you specifically before, and you didn't say anything. And you went, oh, well, Sid has something nice to say. I'm sure Sid does. I would love to talk to Sid at some point. I'm talking to you, Drew. You didn't make a specific counter argument. You didn't answer any questions. You didn't ask me a question. You just went, oh, Sid has something to say.
You're just saying hegemony.
I've laid out.
There's no policy. You said eventually maybe we might have co-ops in the future.
I know big words scare you, Drew, and I know these things scare you because you don't actually have any kind of real thought behind this. You just spurt out propagandist talking points to get it from your billionaire fund.
I talked for more than 2 hours. I talked for more than 2 hours before we went to your, and you can't.
The reason why it's taken 2 hours.
You haven't asked a single policy. You haven't asked a single policy.
I have.
Yeah, you said
even by your own admission, I have.
We'll move away from decommodification.
And even by your own admission, I have, because you strawman my supposed policies earlier when asking the question. So you keep dancing between. You keep dancing between. Oh, Adu has no policies. Oh, Adu's policies suck. Oh, Adu has no policies. Oh, Adu's policies suck. You keep dancing between the two. So which is it? Which is it, Drew? And when I do give you policies, you go to the chat and you go, oh, Sid's made a good point, or whoever's made a good point. Like, you're completely incoherent, Drew.
Tell us what the first step is, because you're talking about massive cultural change. It's very wishy-washy. That's what you accused me of. You said I was.
Well, massive cultural changes do happen. Do you not think like the shift from white Australia to multiculturalism was not a big cultural change?
Sure, but how are we going to do it?
So these things can happen, right?
Okay, tell us how you're going to change this.
Well, I don't think I alone can change it. However, I think the role that I have is as someone who's read a little bit about this, about housing policy, I do economics. I think my role is to kind of not necessarily dumb down, but present things in a digestible manner. I haven't presented anything, allows people. I have.
You said maybe we will move towards and then we will have co-ops.
I didn't say that.
You actually can't even explain. There's nothing stopping you from doing it.
And by the way, this is a separate question. This is a separate question, right? Because you asked me, what am I doing to make this a reality? And then you go back because you can't answer the question, or you can't make a counter argument. Okay, and you go back to, oh, well, Adu has no policies. Which one is it? What question do you want from me, right? Do you want me to answer how I'll get there?
Tell us how it will happen.
I was in the middle of doing it. And you keep interrupting me, right? You keep interrupting me, Drew.
Okay, do it.
So again, as someone who is a bit more knowledgeable than the average person, not in like a snotty way, just because I spend more time on it, I think it's my job to help make it more digestible to people and hopefully promote. I'm not a Leninist, and you keep interrupting me, Drew. So how are we gonna? And look, Drew, next time you interrupt me, I'm leaving the chat because you clearly aren't interested in the proper discussion, right? So I think it's part of my job to put these ideas, these solutions out into the ether, out into the social media sphere or whatever, and popularize these things. And that is one small, very small, but one thing that I can and have been doing. Now, in terms of if I was like the government or something, again, I don't necessarily believe in managing capitalism or whatever, but if I was in government, if I was whatever, right? I think the first thing I'd do is establish a land bank, and it would serve the role similar in Uruguay, but there's other examples as well. But so Uruguay is probably the most prolific example. where they loan out very low cost loans, or they send out specialists to help people establish housing cooperatives. That's probably the first thing I do as a government. You can also expropriate empty properties. You can, with the current, public housing that the Victorian government is set to demolish, you could, instead of demolishing them, retain them for public tenants, and instead establish a cooperative that is, in lockstep with the government. Again, I don't put cooperatives as this is what I want to happen. It's a stepping stone. It's an organizational, organization is not the right word. It's a way of constructing immediate counterpower by decommodifying housing, by decommodifying housing, and it's a way of constructing counterpower in the current system, and hopefully use that as a way to communize the economy.
Okay, how much empty property is there in the 5 major Australian cities?
Nothing. No, nothing about my policies there, which I've said numerous times, Drew. Numerous times.
Again, you're just saying we're going to start
nothing. You've got nothing, Drew.
We're starting with a land bank. We're going to start with a land bank, and then we're going to slowly build up counterpower. Again, there's nothing stopping people from doing cooperatives right now to create that counterpower, but they're not doing it though, which is surprising and weird because apparently it's such a good idea.
Do you think White Australia is a good idea?
No.
So then why do you think people didn't do it for most of Australia's history?
I mean, for most of Australia's history, it's now been almost more than
That's irrelevant to the point, Drew. Irrelevant to the point. Why, if it's a bad thing, why do people want it? If it was a bad thing, why do people want it?
Okay, so you're comparing people's lack of.
Yes, Drew. Answer the question. Answer the question, Drew. Answer the question. No, answer why.
What do you want me to say?
You can't. So you can't make a counter argument. No counter argument, Drew. Again, come on, Drew. Come on.
Ridiculous.
You're an online figure, Drew.
Policy was a government policy. It wasn't about. Okay, here's the actual counter argument.
Answer the question. Oh, here we go. Here we go.
I'm answering. Okay, White Australia policy was an official state policy that prohibited non-white people from entering the country. Correct. You agree with that?
Was it legal for someone to run in Parliament as someone who was against White Australia policy?
I mean, sure, but obviously it was unpopular.
Right. So, but that doesn't mean it's a bad idea.
I didn't say that. I never said that.
Because you're saying just because it's not popular and people,
the reason why
people aren't doing it.
This is why I'm bringing it up, right? This is how I'm bringing it up. The cooperatives, there's nothing stopping. I mean, there's literally White Australia policy as a state policy prohibiting black people from settling in Australia. That's different to the fact that there's no current government state policy prohibiting people from doing co-ops in Australia. You're even saying that there are 2% of people in Australia have co-ops. So why we can do them now? You can do them now. Why not just do it?
So what? So why? Again, you didn't answer the actual question. Because the question,
I agree with you. I agree that
the question specifically was if you ran as someone who was against the White Australia policy, which is completely legal, by the way. Someone using your logic could very well say, "Well, no one wants to end the White Australia policy. Why do it?"
Again, I understand your point that sometimes bad policies can be popular. I understand that point, but right now there's no prohibition on people doing cooperatives. You can literally start one right now if you want.
Why answering the question, Drew? Because so it's not on the table.
If people don't want to do it, how do we get the structural change? Are you going to force people to do it? That's where it comes in. Are you going to force people by?
No, I don't. No, I don't want to force. I want.
You previously said that the housing market should not be commodified at all. People shouldn't be able to sell it on the open market. So you're going to force people to do this.
Well, just like I'd be forcing people not to sell slaves.
Sure. Okay. So you're gonna force people. If somebody's already what happens to somebody with negative equity in their home? They've taken on a big mortgage to buy their home. What happens to them then? They can then sell it.
I agree. By the way, I agree. The problem I have with you isn't necessarily that house prices will fall and cause a crash. I agree. By the way, I think the problem is that we need to do something about it, and you're doing something about it is not good enough, right? And what I'm saying is that, okay, we need to separate ourselves, separate our well-being as much as we can as possible from this insidious housing market. And the way we start to do that is to not own property that's tied up in this insidious housing market.
Okay.
And so it's getting people to move away, getting people to move away. I don't know. I'm not saying this happens overnight. I'm saying this is a long.
You don't know. You don't know.
Cultural change.
You don't know what's going to happen.
I never said I don't know. No, I'm
You
saying
said,
again.
I asked you, what happens?
Drew,
to somebody-
I'm literally answering the question, and you keep interrupting me.
No, you're not answering the question.
I am. I'm literally talking, right? I'm talking right now about the.
I asked
question.
you. I asked somebody spends their life saving.
I just answered, Drew. I
No,
just answered.
that's not an answer. What you said was not an answer.
Wait, no, Drew. What did I say? Relay what I said.
You say it again, then. Say it again. Say it again.
So you don't even know what I said.
I
Drew,
did, but
listen.
no,
What did I say?
What did I say?
What did I say, Drew? Come on.
No,
I didn't answer, what did I say?
You were deflecting. Just say it again.
What was I saying? So what was I deflecting to? What was I saying?
Just say it again. Just
so you don't know because you weren't listening.
Just restate what you're saying.
You don't listen. You don't have a counter argument.
Just say it again. Just say it again. Just say it again, dude.
Come on, Drew. Get your thinking hat on. Come on, open those ears up.
Just say it again. Just say it again.
Well, what how was I dodging? If I was deflecting, if you don't know what I was saying, how would I be deflecting?
I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. What happens to somebody who's eaten the cost of a lifetime mortgage on a house? They've paid off the mortgage for fucking 30 years. They've contributed their entire life savings, and now you're saying you can't sell this house. They wiped out overnight. Why is that fair? And you said, oh, well, that's fair because it's like selling slaves.
Drew, you don't actually know what I was answering with. I literally just answered your question, Drew. Like just then, and you don't know.
Say it again. Say it again.
You interrupt me and you don't know. So okay. So get your thinking cap on, Drew. Come on. So I agree with what you were saying before that a decline in house prices is unfortunately necessary. It's what we do from there, right? And I think that your solution or what you do about it is for lack of a better term, bad. Doesn't affect it. It actually makes it worse, arguably. Now, what I'm saying we do is that okay, yes, we are in a reality where we need house prices to decline, and arguably, I think house prices that we shouldn't have a housing market in the way we do today. Now, the way we help people who may have have a mortgage or bought a house and they've paid a lot of money and it's a slow process. All this kind of cultural change is a slow process. I agree. It's no silver bullet. There's no overnight fix. Is we get people, however fast or however slow, into these counterpower structures, right? Counter structures, and that means people they enter cooperatives. And this is the same thing as the trade union movement, by the way. This is what happened with the trade union movement. It was a slow process, and it exponentially got bigger and bigger and bigger. It's the same kind of process where slowly you build the organizational capacity to, which basically is the form of counterpower, to affect change and hopefully some kind of I want to say revolution, but because that has different connotations, but essentially in a way a revolution, right?
The funny thing is this policy would actually gut immigration to Australia because no one wants to come to Australia if it's a communist fucking cooperative.
I don't have a prescriptive immigration policy. I think people should be able to come here if they want to, so I don't really care.
Okay, that's interesting. So you agree that it might make Australia just a very it would just make us a very undesirable country for people to want to live in.
Well, if they don't want to come, they don't have to come.
Cool. Okay, I agree with you on that.
No counter argument, nothing. Come on, Drew. Come on, Drew. Come on. Where is it?
You're so arrogant for somebody who hides behind a screen. You're not even willing to show your face.
There we go. Come on.
Let me ask you this, right? How are we going to, with the cooperatives, how are we going to compensate people for all the suffering that they've already gone through? People have invested their capital. People have invested their time and their capital for many years. People have literally poured their life savings into this, and they all just get wiped out. And you just say, "Oh, it's a long-term solution." This is really your long-term solution to a short-term crisis that's been spurred on by mass migration over the past 3-4 years.
Wait, you seriously think the housing crisis is a short-term crisis?
It's been significantly worse.
The housing crisis is a short-term crisis. You yourself admitted it's a long-term crisis. Oh, I thought it was a decade
problem, but it's significantly worse.
To do with the commodification of housing.
A long-term problem.
I love the slippage of the master. Come on. Why is it a short-term crisis?
It's a long-term problem, but it's also gotten extremely worse over 3-4 past years. Do you agree that housing has become more unaffordable over the past 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, but it's also become more unaffordable in the past 30 years.
Yes, but do you agree that over the past 4 or 5 years, there's been a particular explosion in house pricing and a particular problem when it comes to rent prices?
Rent prices, yes. House prices, no. But anyway, this is completely off track because you have no counter argument to the policy prescriptions I have. All you say is, "Oh, well, what if people don't want to do it?"
My counter argument. I've got a counter argument.
The point is, we get people to want to do it.
Do you want to hear it? I think that private property rights are good, and I don't think that we should wholesale abolish them long term for cooperatives.
Normative claim. That's not a counter argument. You're just saying what you think.
My counter argument is all these people would be wiped out. It's so
people would be if they die.
Isn't this funny, guys? Isn't this funny? For an hour, you tried to mouse struggle session, torture me over the fact that you're going to decrease people's house prices. It's going to be so unfair to all of them. And then straight up, you're just saying, oh yeah, long term, we're just going to make sure that nobody can fucking sell a house ever because it's the same as selling slaves.
Drew, how do people in Uruguay and those cooperatives distribute housing?
It's a significant. I actually read it out to you. It's a cumbersome process. They have to fucking negotiate with.
What makes it cumbersome?
Because they have to fucking negotiate with a co-op if they want to sell the house.
How do you sell a house in real life, Drew, right now in Australia?
You decide you want to sell the house and you go out and you sell the house. You don't have to negotiate with 50 other cooperative members.
What do you do to sell a house?
You list it on the market. It's relatively much easier.
That's it. You just listed on the market. Well, how do you list it on the market?
Mate, it's much easier than having to negotiate with 50 other cooperatives.
Drew, you're 25 years old and you don't know how the housing market works. Come on. How do you sell a house?
You actually can't even tell us.
How do you sell a house? How do you sell a house?
You think
how do you sell a house, Drew? And how is it more cumbersome than what they're doing in the cooperative?
It's actually a joke.
Which, by the way, I don't think it's like the be-all and end-all model. I just think it's not especially cumbersome.
I mean, generally, you go through a real estate agent. We all know that shit. But obviously, it's a lot easier to go through a real estate agent than having to negotiate with a fucking 500 people on a fucking cooperative.
Drew, have you ever sold a house?
Yes, my family have sold their harem before.
Okay, how long did it take?
2 months, maybe.
Right, so it's a pretty it's a process, right?
You wait for a buyer. You don't have to. What you don't do, you don't have to negotiate with 500 other cooperative members. Facts. Ultimately, it was my mum and my dad. It was ultimately my mum and my dad making the decision that they wanted to sell their house and move out. It wasn't the decision of 500.
If it's like, look, it's completely your opinion, and you've given no polling data to us to show that Uruguayan people in Uruguayan cooperatives think it's more of a cumbersome process. It's purely your opinion. There's no basis to it. So sure, maybe to you it's slightly more cumbersome. I'd rather inconvenience Drew Pavlou than have a commodified housing system.
Okay, just poll the Australian public whether they want to have to negotiate.
Wait. So what's the polling data of the Uruguay? Because they're living in it, right? So what do they think?
Let me tell you what the equivalent is. The equivalent would be.
What are the Uruguayan people in what do Uruguayan housing cooperative members think? Right?
I'm telling you the equivalent. The equivalent would be if you want to sell your house, you have to fucking get the approval of all your neighbors first, right? Ask Australians if they want that. No one wants that.
Do you have specifically the polling data of how Uruguayan cooperative members view the cooperative?
That's actually really funny.
You going to get an answer or not?
It's actually funny that you think this is a good idea. Ask these. Ask people. Go up to the average person.
You're going to answer the question? You're going to answer the question? You're going to answer the question? Do you have the polling data of what Uruguayan cooperative members
actually, you know what's
housing?
interesting?
Do you have it? Do you have it or not? Do you have it or not? Pavlou, do you have it or not?
We don't have it. So therefore, we shouldn't do your.
We do. There's overwhelming satisfaction with cooperative housing in Uruguay.
Oh no, sorry. I thought you were asking, have we got the polling data in Australia on their thoughts on cooperatives?
Drew, you need to fucking listen. Oh my God. I asked you like 4 different times, do you have the polling data of Uruguayans who are cooperative members on the housing?
The people who are more likely to go into the co-ops are people who are more likely to be socialists, right? So of course they're going to be
because housing cooperative movement was a social democratic movement. It was administered by a liberal government, right? They believe in property rights. It's not even a communist thing. But I agree. We need to convince people. We need to convince people that this is the best way forward. I agree. People don't believe that right now in Australia. That's my job. That's part of what I do. Right?
Okay, but tell people you should go out
directly, specifically. You should go out. I do. I've made a whole channel about it.
But actually, tell people. You know the $1 million mortgage that you've been paying off the past 30 years. You're going to eat that because you'll never be able to sell your house again. Tell people that, and just see how popular you are. Tell us how popular communism is.
I've been explicit about this.
Yeah, and people don't want these ideas, do they?
Well, I'm a relatively small channel, so I'm not going to change the world or anything. But again, you're arguing from a.
It's just self-evident. It's just self-evident that people don't want to live in cooperatives in Australia because if they wanted to, there's no legal impediment to stop them from doing so.
Yeah, but there's a whole cultural apparatus from your birth that tells you that home ownership on a detached piece of land is the best way forward.
Okay.
It's incentivizing the economy. It's
Can you
embedded in our
explain
political institutions.
Okay,
It's
you
embedded
made
in
the
media. It's embedded in everything in this country.
So
So sure,
your
it's not
whole argument is
illegal
false
to be a cooperative
Your
member,
whole
but your
argument is false
whole life,
consciousness.
you are socialized to believe in this specific ideal.
So everyone has false consciousness. Everyone has false consciousness, and they can't realize that it's actually better to be quick. Okay. Tell us why everybody is wrong except for you.
Well, I don't think it's just me advocating for this. There's many people advocating for this. But
tell us why 99% of the society is wrong and 1% are correct.
Because just like Drew, if you were anti-white Australia policy in the early 1900s, you'd be correct. You'd be correct.
It's just
you'd be correct to be anti-white Australia policy.
Okay, but we're not talking about racial discrimination.
I know, but it's Drew. That's the point. It's an analogy. Do you know how analogies work, Drew? Do you know how analogies work?
I know it's an analogy, and I think it's a shit analogy because I think private property
Explain
rights.
Why. Explain why it's a shit analogy.
And sex.
Explain why it's a shit analogy.
Okay, I literally am. I don't think that private property rights are analogous to slavery or race-based discrimination.
That's not an argument. That's you saying you think something.
People can
your feelings. Your feelings, Drew.
This is why. Anybody can opt. Anybody right now can opt into a co-op, but nobody could opt out of the White Australia policy. Okay, nobody
could run for parliament and be like, I'm anti-White Australia. That's legal.
Yes, but at the end of the day, non-white people could not come to Australia, right? So it's an oppressive policy. But what's the oppressive policy? What's stopping you from doing the cooperative right now? Nothing.
Well, nothing like in terms of, but again, this is not the argument you're making. The argument you're making is that the reason why housing cooperatives are bad is because people don't want to do it. Likewise, it would follow that the reason why dismantling White Australia would be bad is because people don't want to do it.
But I think that people should be able to make their own economic decisions. You don't think that's the case. You think that people making their own economic decisions are subject to false consciousness.
Do you think someone buying a slave is an economic decision you should be able to control?
I don't think buying a house is equivalent to buying a slave. That's just fundamentally an incorrect decision.
Again, it's an analogy, Drew. It's not supposed to be the same. That's the point of an analogy. The logic is there.
Yeah, and it's a retarded
buying
analogy.
A slave,
it's retarded.
Drew, is buying a slave an economic activity?
This is a retarded argument because
is buying a slave an economic activity?
Slavery is immoral. Private property ownership is not immoral.
Is buying a slave an economic activity?
I've just told you slavery is immoral, but private property rights.
I know that's what you're saying, Drew. And I'm asking you: is buying a slave, whether you think it's immoral or not, is that an economic activity?
It is an economic activity. It's still immoral.
So you believe in regulating economic activity. That's fine. We both believe in regulating activity. Don't act like you're like on this high horse of like.
No, but there's a whole distinction. There's a whole distinction between abolishing slavery and abolishing all private property rights, because all these people have invested their life savings into building up their own property.
Wait, do you think? What do you think the slavers did? Do you think they took out loans? You abolish slavery. What happens to the savings and the families of these slavers?
You know what's actually funny? In Britain, they actually recompensated all the slave owners, and you might say that's immoral, but it actually ended up ending slavery prior to America ending slavery.
Do you think they should have done that?
I don't. I think it's immoral that they did it, but it also ended slavery 30 years earlier than America ended slavery without a civil war.
So you think we should recuperate slave owners for owning slaves?
No, I don't think that. But
so why bring it up?
I'm just saying because I mean that obviously that's true.
It's another null point, Drew. Come on.
No, the reason I brought that up is it did end slavery.
Drew, I'm not saying owning slaves is the same as owning a house. I'm just saying the logic is the same. The logic you're providing is the same. The logic you're providing is the same. It is.
Okay. I think that people should be able to own their own homes. You think that's not the case. Tell us why.
Well, I think they should be able to own as their personal property, but I don't think they should be able to put it on a market to speculate on it.
There's a distinction between speculating and just being able to sell on the market so that you can then transfer your house, move to a different area. You might want. Okay, here's another question, right? How do we distribute?
Drew, you're shifting the goalposts again. You can't answer the fundamental points that you're making. Look, let me ask you this. I don't care if I inconvenience Pavlou. I would rather have a system of decommodification than
let me ask you this. If everybody wants to own a beachfront property, how do we distribute that in society? How are we going to decide who owns what in these cooperatives? If there's no market, if we can't adjudicate scarcity through price signals, how do we decide who gets to stay by the ocean? Are we just going to do what the fucking Bolsheviks did and just go, oh, if you're a party member, you get choice property?
Well, I'm not a Bolshevik, so I don't believe in that. But
I think how are we going to do it then? How are we going to distribute this scarcity in society?
If someone wants to live there, they can live there.
Okay, but what if there are 1 million people who want to live on the beachfront in Surfers Paradise, and it's just impossible to supply that, right? So how do we do that?
What do you mean?
Like what I'm saying is, how do we? There's obviously scarcity.
You've already gone over how houses are exchanged in a semi-decommodified manner. So we already went over this.
Okay, but let me ask you this, right? If you have co-ops, so you agree that somebody should be able to transfer their home, that you agree that they should be able to leave their home even though it's not going to be on the market, right?
Yes.
Okay. So say somebody is living in the outer suburbs of Brisbane and they decide they want to see change. They want to go live in Surfers Paradise. They want to live right on the beach. They want to live in a beautiful apartment right on the beach. In our system right now, that's more expensive because more people want that, right? That's a way to try to adjudicate scarcity, right? If we get rid of the price signals, how do we determine this in society, right? Like if somebody really wants something, how are we going to determine that in society?
First and best served.
Okay, is that not an argument for the colonization of Australia then? First in, best served?
Well, if they're not harming anyone, then sure. But the colonization of Australia harm people.
Okay, but what if somebody goes, okay, I want a beachfront property. These guys already live on the beach. I'm going to just take their home. Like how do we adjudicate scarcity?
That'd be harming them.
Okay, then how are we going to manage scarcity in society? Because obviously everybody wants unlimited things basically, but we don't have unlimited things. I want to live in a mansion at Adu. I can't afford that right now. I'm renting. Cool, that's good for you. But a lot of people do want to live in nice houses. A lot of people want to live by the beach.
Well, I think most people wouldn't want a life of complete opulence. I think most people
not opulence. I'm not talking. Let me explain. When I say
exactly. So people, well, wants and needs, or wants rather, not necessarily our needs. To a degree, socialist, right?
Big house, right? Let me ask you this, right? You want to live in a big house. You just basically say
you've read line by line how the exchange of housing would work.
Okay, but how do you transfer?
And the only counter argument you have to it, the only argument you have against it is that it's cumbersome. Are you serious?
Okay.
I don't care that Drew Pavlou thinks it's cumbersome. I care about the decommodification of housing. I care that our system has made it so hard for people to buy a house and access a need, right?
Let's assume.
I don't care if you feel personally with no basis at all that it's cumbersome.
Good for you.
I don't care, Drew.
Let's decommodify the housing market. Okay, let's assume that we implement your system 100%. Good for you. You've won. Okay. Somebody wants to go live on the Brisbane River. There are only X amount of homes on the Brisbane River. You can't
You've
build.
You've asked this a million times.
No, but you don't have an answer though. You just said first in, best served.
I answered it. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, so
if someone wants to go there, you can go, hey, to the local council or whatever kind of committee. Hey, I want to live here. You can wait in line. That's how it'd work.
So we're gonna have. This is beautiful. You finally come around to it. We're gonna have Soviet bread lines. That's how property worked in the Soviet Union.
No,
everybody could get a home, you would just have to wait for it. Everybody could get a fucking car. You just have to go into the lottery for it and wait 8 years to get one.
The exact same thing happens right now. You just have to wait for someone to list it. You don't get to walk into someone's house and go, hey, can I have this house for money? If they're not listing it, you have to wait for someone to list it, you fucking idiot.
Okay. But in our system, not everybody can afford to live on the Brisbane River, correct?
Sure. But the same thing would happen, right? So some people, the lucky few will be able to live in the Brisbane River. And if they want to leave and other people want to come in, they can negotiate that. That's fine. The same thing happens in our current system. The only difference is that right now that there's that is inflated by speculation.
Okay. The
same thing would happen. The same thing has happened.
Okay, so let's assume right now.
The same thing happens right now, except first and best dressed. The only difference is that it's the person with the biggest pockets. That's it.
Okay, Adu. Let's assume that the people who are living on the Sydney Harbour are really rich, correct?
Right now, yeah.
Yes. Okay, in your system, they just have the property forever, right? Because it's first in, best dressed. They were already there. Say the workers of West Sydney want to go and live on the harbour. How are you going to deal with that distributional issue?
I literally just told you, Drew.
So it's not even going to have benefits for inequality. If your family was rich 200 years ago and they bought a fucking home on the harbour, they can just have it for all infinity time.
If they want to live there, that's fine. I don't see a problem with people living where they currently live. The same thing again. The same thing happens in our current system, Drew. The same thing happens. The only difference is that people list the property. You can't go into someone's house and say, "I want to live here," if they don't list the property.
Okay, the funny thing
And
is,
the only difference is the only
in your
difference,
communist scenario, everybody who's currently rich is rich forever.
at least in my scenario, it doesn't discriminate based on wealth. Whereas your system discriminates based on the wealthiest person gets to live there.
But it's the same in your system. The same in your system, right? Because the people who currently live on the Sydney Harbour are all rich, and they get to stay on the Sydney Harbour for all time. Because
I don't think, again, housing is one prong of something. I don't think there should be people who are...
literally just, your system is just inheritance, which is fucking ridiculous. Like, it's actually more unequal than the current
Drew,
system.
stop reading the chat. It's not inheritance.
But it's actually more unequal. It's literally more unequal.
Do you think people don't move out of areas? Like, what are you talking about, Drew?
Okay, but here's the thing, right? Somebody who's living in the outer suburbs of Brisbane...
I don't believe we just decommodify housing in the context of, we just leave the rest of capitalism, right?
But it's just funny because it's not just
decommodified housing in the context of capitalism, right?
I've actually destroyed you, Andrew. I've literally destroyed you here because in your system, anybody who owns a Sydney Harbour property gets to own that property for all time unless they just decide to magically leave, in which case there's a housing waiting list to live on the Sydney Harbour. This is a fucking ridiculous policy. This is literally fucking stupid.
There's no, you can dress it up in whatever rhetorical bullshit you want. That's obviously not what I believe, Drew.
What's the incentive? There's no incentives in the system. There's no incentives in the system. So if you own a rich house,
Drew, do you think the only reason people move is that they can get money out of it?
That's part of it. That's part of it, right? But
it's part of it. But do you think it's the only reason?
Part of it is
the only reason why people
might want to move into a better house. How do you deal with that in your system?
I just told you.
There's wait lists. Yes, that's fucking stupid.
There's wait lists right now.
Money cashes out to preferences. How do we adjudicate people's preferences in this system?
Drew,
your system has there's nothing in your system to adjudicate for preferences. It's just wait lists. There's just going to be a 5 million deal.
Drew,
it's not even a smart idea because if I was you, I'd be saying there should be a lottery for
about interrupting and you constantly interrupt, Drew. You just said, Drew.
Okay. Why not even advocate a lottery instead of a wait list?
Drew. You said before, how long do you spend looking for a rental?
Okay. Yeah, 2 months. 2 months.
Is that not effectively a breadline?
Yeah,
in practice, it's a breadline. Right, exactly.
It's going to be worse under your system. This is the funny thing. This is worse under your system. I'll explain to you right? I'll explain to you right. If you are living in a rich house under this system and it's first best first dressed, you're not going to ever have an incentive to leave your house because you might think, I won't get a better house than the one I'm currently in because it might be a lottery. So therefore, it's just literally the current distribution of property in society is literally locked in forever. It's literally insane, dude. It doesn't even make sense.
I don't think decommodifying housing is, by the way, I do think wealth should be expropriated. So I don't understand this fantasy that
so you're going to steal the homes.
Operate on it.
You're going to steal the homes, and then you're just going to, have a lottery system for who gets to live in the nice ones.
Well, specifically, you were asking me specifically what my an ideal would be, right? Not how I get there. Right. So again, you can kind of conflate these two things. And
if you're in a desirable piece of land, what's the incentive in your system to give that land up and go to a different place?
If you want to move. If you don't like where you're living right now.
But what if you want to say, okay, I live in a nice house.
Just like it is in the current system, except you take out the monetary aspect.
Okay, but if we take out the monetary aspect, then it's just lottery and waste lists.
It's the same thing right now.
It's not, dude, because
it is. If only right now, the only difference right now is that it's rigged for people who are wealthier. People who are wealthier can bypass the breadline.
It's still possible. You can't. In the current system, it's still possible in the current system to better your life circumstances, like educate yourself, get a better job, rise up in the ranks. Right? Under your system, there's none of that. There's literally no social incentive. There's no social mobility ever again.
Look, there's some degree.
No social mobility ever again.
As a baseline, I think people should just exchange houses as they want to with each other, right? Or with
people.
But there are instances. There are instances where there could be other mitigating circumstances, right? So, for example, if I don't know, there was a construction project going on, and there was a bunch of construction workers who needed to move into a specific area, I think we should free up housing for them or build housing for them to live there temporarily. That's fine.
Okay, but the whole reason we have a market system, right, is to try and create an independent measure for the value of a home to price in people's preferences, right? Obviously, a house that is more desirable will be more expensive, correct?
Under this current system, yes.
Yes. Okay. So in your system, where there is no monetary incentive, whatever, if somebody has a nice home, their only incentive will be to trade that home for another nice home, right? So therefore, you just basically lock in the current existing property distribution forever. Because there'd be no incentive. What's the incentive for somebody who currently has a beautiful big mansion?
Because again, I don't think that decommodification of housing can or should be in isolation. It should be in the context of decommodifying the whole economy.
Again, though, I'm just wondering though, like how we
and you keep trying. And look, I've let you kind of direct the conversation a bit, but for the past like 30 minutes or so, you've kind of weaseled your way out of actually answering specifically about the effectiveness of the policy. Because you haven't. If you looked up the Uruguay stuff, you'd see it's highly successful. If you looked up the Germany stuff, it's highly successful.
Dude, you can't explain without price signals how you're going to deal with scarcity in society.
I have.
Just wait lists. Okay, wait lists or lottery. Is it lottery or wait lists?
Look, it could depend. I think wait lists could work. I think lottery maybe in some circumstances could work.
Can you understand?
I will say, this isn't. Look, and this gets a bit utopian. I think that it isn't just a negotiation between the homeowner and the potential buyer or whatever, but it should be done in fuck. Oh, that's what I'm trying to think.
Can you give us an example?
It should be done in alongside and in lockstep with the local community. So match people's needs in that community.
I know a society that abolished the price signal and decommodified a large amount of society, right? What do you think of Pol Pot's Cambodia?
I don't think Pol Pot's Cambodia decommodified housing in the way that I'm saying.
Okay, so you just do it. All the other societies that have decommodified housing through massive amounts of violence, it's just magically not going to be violent in your system.
Wait, Drew, specifically, what's the similarity between me and Pol Pot's policy? Because again, I've pointed to you numerous times.
They abolish all forms of private property. There's no money. There's no It's literally just they literally destroyed.
Sure, you've got some of your negative examples. I've already pointed to
Pol
some
Pot's a pretty bad example.
I agree. I don't like Pol Pot. I've pointed to Vienna, for example, they've in the 1920s and 30s. Obviously, again, you still haven't contended with the actual specific example of Uruguay, which is funny. But there's also examples in Germany as well. I think have been successful.
Again, I ask you this, right?
And again, to be clear with the Pol Pot stuff, I don't believe in a state-centric project. It was a state-centric project, so I don't agree with that.
Okay, that's good. That's good, Adu. Again, if everybody wants to move into the same place, how are we going to decide who gets to move in? Because the first in, first best dress is actually unequal. It's actually unfair.
Drew, why can't you? I mean, it's infinitely more fair than having a system which benefits people who have deeper pockets, which is right?
It's literally more. Our system right now is more fair because if I want to get a better house, I can work harder to get it, and it is still possible. But in your scenario,
are you seriously saying that in our current system, it's more feasible for the average young person to outbid a property investor because they can work harder? You just said that.
No, I'm saying that
because
in the long term,
in an auction, for example, you're not the sole buyer. You're competing with people cashed up with capital, right? You're competing with all these different people. At least, and look, I'm not saying mine is the perfect system.
You're still competing with everybody in your system because it's just a lottery.
Yes, but it's fair. It's fair, right?
Because it's not determined. Because people should.
It's objectively fair. Not only is it democratic, right? But it's also fair because it doesn't take into consideration the amount of capital you're willing to put up front. Whereas in your system, if someone owns a fuck ton of money, they can outbid everyone there who may be a potential first-home buyer.
Why should it be?
That's literally by definition more egalitarian and more democratic than what you propose.
It's less egalitarian because everybody
saying it doesn't make it so, Drew. Argue why specifically it is.
Chance of getting nothing. In your scenario, everybody has an equal chance of getting nothing.
It's absolutely not true.
We all go on the lottery for the house.
And again, specifically, we have examples. And for example, I mean, I hate to hone on it so much, but Uruguay, right? You read out specifically
Uruguay is a commercial. You literally said yourself. You said it yourself.
No, the specific cooperative sub-straw manning. It's the specific housing cooperative sector, which you yourself read out how they distribute and exchange homes.
Yeah,
all you said was it's cumbersome in your opinion. That's not an argument, Drew. That's your feelings because you can't actually muster the counter argument.
My feelings are this.
Drew, I don't care what your feelings are.
I'm trying to answer your question. I'm trying to answer your question, Adu.
That's not my question. My question is your feelings. I don't give a fuck about your feelings. I care about your arguments.
Yeah, I'm trying to give you an argument right now.
No, you're saying, oh, this is my feeling. I don't care about your feelings, Drew. Make an argument as opposed to saying, oh, I just feel like it's cumbersome.
I'm literally making an argument. I'm about to make an argument. I was going to say the revealed preferences of Australian society is that people don't want to live in Uruguay cooperatives.
I don't care.
Cool. So you want to force everybody to go back to the fucking land like Khmer Rouge?
No, I don't know. I don't care about your stick.
You want to force
that's not answering the question.
They don't want.
That's not answering the question.
Nobody wants this. Nobody wants this.
I literally
Nobody wants to live in your fucking
I told you,
world.
I don't believe in a state-centric project, right?
Okay, nobody wants this. Nobody wants this. So you think you have to force it on people.
Drew, what do you think change means? What do you think changing society means? I agree. People right now don't want it. That's the whole point. I want to change that, Drew.
Cool. Good for you.
And
Good
you haven't, and you, no counter argument, nothing. Again, you read out specifically, and this is you yourself, right?
I want to own my own home. I don't want to live in a cooperative.
This is you
I don't want to live in a cooperative, Adu. I don't want to. That's my preference.
I don't care what you think is inconvenient.
People don't want to live in cooperatives.
I agree. Right now, they don't. But I think it's an overwhelmingly, by the literature, by the available evidence, I think it's overwhelmingly a positive example of what we can do to move towards a decommodified system. Okay. And you yourself read about this cumbersome way of exchanging and distributing homes. Explain how it's cumbersome.
What if people don't want that?
I agree. Right now, they don't want it.
If you live in a cooperative and you decide, I want to leave the cooperative and go back to owning my own house, you can't do that.
No, but in the cooperative, you self-manage your house. You own the house.
But in your system, if you want to leave the cooperative and go back and own your own house freehold, you can't do that.
You can.
What if 10% of people don't want to live in the cooperatives? What happens then? Do they get to still have a private market?
Say you cut out.
No, it's the same as slavery. Sorry,
you cut out. What'd you say?
Okay. Say in your scenario, 60% of people want to live in cooperatives, 40% want to have their own homes. Are you going to say to the 40%, sorry, you're not allowed to own your own home? You have to go into the cooperatives. You've got to herd them into the cooperatives by force, Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot style.
Drew, I think it's the third time I'm saying I don't believe in a state-centric project.
Okay, so you just magically wait until everybody wants communism, and then we have communism. You just wait until everybody magically wants communism, and then you're going to implement it.
That's how cultural change works. Yes. Well,
okay.
Again, I've said what I specifically want to do is my role specifically, but I think that's what we should be moving towards in society. And I agree. Again, I've said it a million times, and you keep honing back to it because you can't make a specific counter argument, a logical one that's outside of your specific feelings about the housing models that are proposed. We've only gone through Uruguay. We can talk about Germany if you want. We can talk about Vienna. I've got a whole channel about it, right? We haven't talked about these things because you keep deflecting to your own personal feelings.
Dude, your whole thing is magic. You're just saying.
You said before that cultural change is possible in society. You said before that cultural change is possible. I agree. Cultural change is possible. We should be moving towards it.
Okay. We're just going to magically have that cultural change. You can't explain how it's going to happen. It's just going to magically happen.
I just did. I think there's a number of ways in which I personally can do it. I think there's a number of ways other organizations can do it. But I've talked about that at length, and I've talked about it at length in my videos. Yet the only sticking point you have is that I personally feel like this specific model is cumbersome, which is not an argument, Drew.
My argument is that no one wants to live in a co-op. I don't want to live in a co-op. I want to live by myself.
Drew Pavlou, I fucking agree. I agree right now that no one wants to live in a cooperative society. I agree.
Will the culture change in our lifetimes? Before the housing shortage is fucking fixed?
Look, I'm relatively...
this all started because I said, let's bring down home prices in the next 2 to 3 years by not having infinity migration. And you're just basically saying, no, let's not do that. Let's just wait 80 years to have communism.
Well, to be clear, I think there's social democratic solutions to these problems. I mean, you asked me specifically what I want, but I think this is perfectly manageable. Not perfectly manageable, but there are ways we can mitigate this crisis within the context of a social democracy. But you asked me specifically what I want. So that's why I've answered the way I have. But again, Drew, you haven't actually answered specifically. You keep asking me, well, how can we have a decommodified housing system if no one wants decommodified housing? I agree. That's the change we've got to we've got to be the change.
Do you think it's more likely? Let me ask you what's more likely right now, right? We wait 80 years for the culture to change to embrace communism, or there's just significant backlash to mass migration that, unfortunately, you just empower the far right and the far right take power, and then they just do bad things. Because I'm actually a pragmatist. I don't want the far right.
The only person here that empowers the far right is you.
Instead of waiting 100,000 years for communism, I just say
the only person here is empowering the far right is you. You're the one that's probably
every single one of your ideas is empowering the far right. Every single one, because you're saying
it's absolutely not. You're the one who is using fake doxing information from far right people. You're the one whose system produces the far right.
I'll explain to you why. I'll explain to you why you're empowering the far right. Your policy is let the current housing disaster continue forever, infinitely, because we can't ever reduce migration. We just have infinity migration forever. And then 100 years from now, there'll be enough cultural change that we'll have fucking communism and cooperatives. You're empowering the far right for that because you're not accepting real. Like seriously, what's more realistic? I gave you 5 different policies. I said let's limit migration, let's end negative gearing, let's increase supply of housing, let's regulate and rezone and everything. I gave you multiple solutions, and your solution is let's not do any of that. Let's just wait for the culture to change, and then the culture will change, and then we'll have communism. Who's going to do more to stop the far right from coming to power? It's literally me, because I'm saying instead of waiting for the fucking disaster, the entire population to go fascist, let's just reduce migration to where it was 5 years ago, and then there won't be such a crisis in the economy, and then the people won't feel a rise. Then people won't.
At no point have I said that we wait and do nothing.
That's exactly what you're basically saying. Because you're saying you've said multiple times.
I think
you said multiple times. You don't believe in state force.
You're shifting the goalpost. Drew, what you were asking me about specifically before is what I would want in an ideal world, not how we would get there specifically, right? How we would get there, and I think winning small things. For example, right? So I think a part of this movement, a part of a communist movement, should be stopping the privatization of public housing. I think that's a good thing, right? That's not doing communism right now, but that's a step towards. That's a win. That's my action. What I want isn't that again, necessarily mutually exclusive.
Sorry, can you say it again?
Well, it's not even necessarily a small step. I think that we can win small things in the current by building counterpower and extracting concessions from the current hegemony, right? That's the point of counterpower, but we're still building towards something greater, but we can still extract small concessions in the way, right? So for example, the public housing towers in Melbourne, right? I think they shouldn't be demolished. I think if we have enough clout in this way, that's not the point I'm making, Drew. You're focusing on something that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying these small wins are one in the process of constructing a new society. We're not just waiting and doing nothing. Right, and if anything, hold on. And I want to comment about the far right thing. Because what you're doing is effectively giving into the rhetoric of the far right and saying that it's just the immigrants. And you disproportionately focus on immigrants. You've never once mentioned the commodification of housing at all, right? You've never once said we want to build mass public housing. Right?
I'll explain to you. If you reduce migration to where it was 5 years ago, which is not radical at all, if you just have this moderate policy, which is what Keir Starmer is doing in Britain right now, you will take away power from the far right because they will have less power. They're exploiting this issue because it's a real issue in society that's causing people pain and harm.
What is the recent polling have reform at in the UK?
They're literally on track to win. That's why Keir Starmer has to take away their power by lowering migration.
Right. So do you seriously think if Keir Starmer committed to a slight decline in migration that the reform is going to be stopped?
For Britain, it's not a slight decline. They need to massively decline it. They had 1 million net per year. They need to take it down to 150, 200,000 a year minimum. They need like 70, 80% cuts. And if they do that, it'll take away so much of Nigel Farage's power. That's the worst.
You're giving into them.
Can I tell you, Adu, if Keir Starmer does that, Nigel Farage will be fucking spewing because that's what he's building all his power off. That's what he's exploiting anger in society. If you take the anger away by just having a moderate policy, then they can't exploit it.
So instead of doing what instead of allowing the far right to win, you're just doing what the far right wants. It's great policy.
This is what's happening.
It's great policy, Joe. I love it. But there's a broader point I want to make about you and the far right.
And then the far right exploit that anger. If you make the population no longer angry, then the far right can't exploit that. It's simple.
But you don't target the immigrants. You don't punish the immigrants for that. You actually address the reasons why you are.
It's not a punishment to say that infinity immigration is not sustainable for every country on earth.
But you're restricting their freedom of movement, so you are.
But freedom of movement does not exist. You can't have total freedom of movement. It's impossible, Adu. It's literally impossible.
I agree, but you're moving more towards a restrictive stance, which yes,
you have to because the population is angry. People are justifiably angry. People are angry because they can't get their home.
They're angry at the cost of living, but this isn't the problem with immigration, right? And you're just saying side with the far right, given all their demands, that'll totally appease the far right. That'll totally fix everything, right?
Okay.
I love how
we don't want the far right. I don't want national
liberals and appeasing the far right. It's a great
just lower migration
combo.
so that we don't get the far right coming to power. It's as simple as that.
Appeasing the far right, Drew. And again, like you collaborate with the far right.
You think that
you collaborate with the far right.
Everybody has the right to live in Britain and Australia.
And again, the only reason this has come up is because you cannot answer specifically what is wrong with the cooperative housing model. You keep trying to dodge away from that, right?
No, I'm just saying there's anger in society.
All you say it's cumbersome. All it is cumbersome.
People are justifiably mad.
It inconveniences me. I don't care if it's cumbersome to you, Drew. That's not an argument against it.
I don't give a fuck about the cumbersome issue. I'm saying to you, people are mad.
I do, because you're shifting the goalposts away from what we're actually talking about, right?
You can stop the far right from coming to power if you just reduce infinity migration. It's fucking simple.
You're misdirecting, Drew. You can't. You've been fundamentally unable to address the points being made, even when you read it out yourself. And all you have to say is that it's cumbersome. That's all you have to say.
Okay, who has worked better in Germany at stopping the far right? The 1930s Socialists or the CDU, which just blocked the far right, the AfD, from joining the coalition? The CDU is more successful at stopping the fascists.
Well,
the socialists let them come to power because they all were obsessed with ideological purity.
This isn't about ideological purity, but again, Drew, the system you want, the system, the current
forever, and then infinity migration forever. Otherwise, you're giving
the system that you want. The system that you want produces the far right. The inequalities that spew from your system
decrease migration.
Absolutely, it does.
There won't be a far right if you just decrease migration. It's fucking simple.
No, it's absolutely not as simple as that, because the far right will find things to latch onto. They'll find scapegoats.
There was a poll. Do you accept that
you're misdirecting? The reason why people move towards the far right is because fundamentally the material conditions are shit, right? And what you want to do is not address the material conditions. You don't want to make people's lives better. You just want to attack the immigrant.
Western Sydney is the most culturally diverse place on the entire planet. There's 300 languages spoken in Western Sydney. There was a poll of Western Sydney before the election. 80% of Western Sydney, which is the most culturally diverse place on earth with 300 languages, 80% of them wanted lower migration. And they're all migrants themselves. So do you see there's anger in society? Let's just reduce migration and there won't be anger.
It's misdirected though. Why?
No. Why do you have this cult-like belief in infinity migration?
Drew, the far right didn't win the election in Australia. The far right lost.
Dude, it's not looking good, is it? Because on the current trajectory, with how bad the economy is in Australia,
what far right party won in Australia?
But look at the rest of the developed democratic world. The economic conditions in Australia are really bad right now. In 5 to 10 years, do you accept, Adu, that in 5 to 10 years, the economy in Australia could get so bad that the far right come to power? I think that's a genuine danger.
Yes, that's not to do with the immigrants, though.
I don't think it's to do with the immigrants, but I think we need to be pragmatic and we have to say, okay, instead of doing infinity migration, we'll slightly lower it. Therefore, there won't be as much anger in society that the far right can feed upon. Look at all the
actual reasons why
look at where fascism exists.
Are living in terrible living conditions. Oh no! Okay, all right.
Look at where fascism exists in America.
I know you've had fun interrupting me constantly, and you can't answer. You can't answer the question. So I will leave if you continue to interrupt me, because I know you can't actually address any of the points I'm making. Because that's why I have to continue to interrupt me. So if you let me actually speak, I would love to. Yeah, sure. So instead of actually addressing because you just admitted it yourself, like you just admitted that immigrants aren't the reason behind people's declining living standard. So
it's not the sole issue, but
what we should do. What we should. You just admitted that. You just said. So you're contradicting yourself now, because you just said.
It's not the sole image. It's not the sole thing, but it is part of it.
You said that it's not because of the immigrants, and I agree. It's not because of the immigrants.
I agree. It's not solely because of the immigrants. No one poses one thing.
Instead of actually addressing the reasons why people might go to the far right, you are caving to the far right and just dealing with one scapegoat. One scapegoat, Drew.
Okay. Do you think it's ever legitimate?
Why do you think people go to the far right? Do you think people just fundamentally hate immigrants?
No, I didn't say that either.
Right.
So there's pressure in society. We agree. Pressure in society on housing. People will go to the far right, and I want that to stop. I don't want that to happen. So let's stop it from happening from before it happens.
And the way to do that is to improve people's material conditions.
Okay, do you think it's ever acceptable to limit migration in society? Ever?
Yes, I literally opened the conversation by saying that.
Okay, so why not just do it? If immigration is feeding into the housing crisis and making people angry in society, we don't want the far right.
It's not though. It's not. It's misdirected anger, and I think you're overstating how much.
You don't have a cult-like belief. For some reason, you have a cult-like belief in infinity migration. I don't know why.
True. Over 80% of people in Australia think that it's fine to have they're fine with immigrants. Over 80% of people.
Dude, 80% of people in West Sydney said migration needs to go down, and West Sydney is the most culturally diverse place on the entire planet with 300 languages spoken. And even they were saying 80% said lower migration.
Drew, you're looking at one area. One area, Drew. One area.
It's literally the most culturally diverse in the entire planet.
Look at the whole country.
More and more the polling says that people want migration down.
What polling?
The polling says limit migration.
One poll in Western Sydney.
No, there's much more. There's poll after poll after poll saying that migration is a big issue.
Let's Google immigration poll Australia. Lowy Institute, very liberal. Here we go.
They're going to Lowy Institute. 40, everyone loves
48%. 48%. So it's not even a majority. 48%.
Actually, wait, hang on. I thought polling's not a convincing argument, Adu. I thought that you thought that nothing should ever come down to polling.
When have I ever said that?
Oh, you said if a policy is unpopular but right, we should just go through with the policy. So what if this is just unpopular but right?
No. This is your argument though. This is your argument. I'm checking your argument. I'm not making an affirmative argument. I'm checking your framing, Drew. You're saying, because so many people are so virulently hateful towards immigrants because their material conditions are declining. Drew, stop nitpicking. Drew, stop nitpicking. Actually respond to the argument. Because people are suffering materially, they're going to scapegoat immigrants. Drew, 48% of people think immigration is too high in Australia. 48% of people think immigration is too high.
No, it's much higher than that.
First result on Google, Lowy Institute. Lowy Institute.
I'm bringing up this. I just sent you the poll. 46% of voters said that while immigration has been good for Australia, it should be reduced until the government improves housing affordability and infrastructure. Around 4 out of 5. 86% of Western Sydney voters believe Australia's immigration intake should be lowered. 86%.
Wait, so do you think the entirety of the national policy of Australia should be dictated by Western Sydney?
No, dude, but if Western Sydney is doing this...
You just said 46% nationally thought that immigration was too high.
No, that was a subset of that one poll. So of that one poll, 86% in West Sydney said that it's too high. And then there were different reasons. Their reasoning for it was varied. 46% it should be lowered as a direct response to housing.
So national policy should be withheld. National policy should be dictated by Western Sydney. Is that what you're saying?
No, dude. I'm saying that Western Sydney is quite representative.
The point is
I'm saying it's quite representative.
No, it's not. It's not. It's 48%. Lowy Institute.
Okay, but dude, if Western Sydney is so culturally diverse, why do you think...
I don't care about one specific area if we're talking about national policy. So you're saying, this wave of anti-immigrant sentiment, it's not, in reality, it's a slim minority, which I agree, by the way, it's concerning, but the answer then isn't to punish immigrants.
But is it a punishment to say that not everybody can come to Australia? Why is it a punishment?
Yes, you're restricting their movement.
Why do they have a right to come to Australia? Not everybody has a right to come to Australia.
I think they do. I think if you're saying you have to have a justifiable reason.
It's not sustainable. Why does somebody have it?
I agree that in certain circumstances. I agree in certain circumstances. I agree in certain circumstances that restricting people's movement is justifiable because it increases their positive liberty compared to their negative liberty. But in this instance, you have to justify it. And you're saying, because the population is so far right, because their material circumstances are declining, and they want anti-immigration policies, that's actually not reflective of the reality.
No, you say that everybody has an innate right to come to Australia if they want to. Why?
I didn't say innate. I said they're able to move. They do, yeah. Do you not have a right to freedom of movement?
Why? What gives them that right?
Do you not believe in the freedom of movement?
I don't believe in an innate right to freedom of movement. No, I don't.
So you don't think? So you think that the government can regulate like whether you can go from your house to a bathroom?
No, that's obviously so different. That's different to talking about infinity. No, that's very different to infinity migration policy.
I don't believe in infinity migration. I believe in people. I think people should be allowed to come here so long as that there isn't a overwhelmingly negative effect on
definitely have freedom of movement. I think Australian citizens should definitely have freedom of movement within the country, 100%. But why is there a right for every single person on earth to have a freedom of movement right to live in Australia? That's not true.
Well, It's a neutral
Who
thing.
gives
There's
them
no
that right?
if someone. So I'm here and someone moves to Australia or whatever. I'm not like you have to make an affirmative argument to block their movement because they're moving, right?
So
Restricting immigration
right now,
is an affirmative argument.
No, dude. I want you to argue. I want you to justify why somebody has an inherent freedom of movement right to move to Australia. Why?
Again, I don't think that. I just told you what I think. Drew,
But you think everybody?
so
You think
dull.
everybody has
Like,
a freedom? Okay. X person living on the other side of the world wants to move to Australia. Should they have that right?
they can right now, yeah.
Why? Why should they have that right?
If they want to.
But what if we don't want to have that much immigration in the country? Shouldn't our preferences also be considered? Well, shouldn't the preferences of Australian citizens be held to a higher standard than the preferences of people who have no citizen connectionship to Australia?
Well, sure. Well, but they don't right now because 48% of people think that immigration is too high, which is not a majority. So you lose.
Well, look, I'm sure that smugness is really going to help you into the future, Adu, because honestly, it's getting so bad.
No counter argument, just feelings and no facts, just feelings. Come on, smugness is really going to get you far out. Yeah, dude, come on, make a counter argument.
Okay, the counter argument is that no, you don't have not everybody has a right to move to Australia. That's just simple, just obvious. You have to agree. You have to
That's an affirmative argument. You have to justify.
I'll give you a list of things that you have to. I'll give you a list of things that you have to comply with to be able to move to Australia. One, you have to agree with the laws of Australia. Two, you have to support the right of Australia to exist as a country.
True.
Three,
the far right lost the Australian election. People overwhelmingly are pro-immigration in Australia.
But it's not.
So we don't need to decrease it.
No. The polling shows it's increasingly unpopular.
It actually doesn't. It actually shows it's stagnated.
I'm going to
I'll link it in the chat. Pavlou Institute immigration rate. 48% of people think immigration is too high. 40% think it's too low, and 10% think it's about right in 2024. Which is actually people thinking it's too high is actually down from 2018, which when the far right wasn't actually that big back then. So again, we don't actually need to. There's no need to placate the far right. All we need to do is satisfy people's material needs. But you're so concerned with scapegoating immigrants.
You just have this obsession. You have this obsession that everybody who wants to come to Australia should be able to be crammed in. What if that's not the case?
Drew, I've mentioned it like a million times, like literally so many times that I think in certain circumstances, restricting people's movement is all right.
Okay.
But you have to justify why. Like Drew, are you deaf?
But what if it's not a pandemic? What if it's not a pandemic and right now we want to restrict migration? We don't want it to be 500,000 a year. What if we want it to?
You have to justify. I think you have to justify why.
Okay, my justification is I want it to go down to 200,000, not 500,000.
That's not justification. That's you reiterating your statement.
It's the preferences of an Australian citizen.
And you have to justify why it's your preference.
Okay, because it's hard with housing. We don't have enough housing right now to fill up.
But you couldn't actually. I mean, we can go back to housing and immigration if you want, but you haven't actually given any counter arguments to anything I've said about housing and immigration. No,
you haven't had counter arguments to it.
I have. I've brought up the literature. I've brought up specific examples in Victoria and the ACT, and you've said nothing about how.
You have a couple property council approved studies. Why is it the case, Adu, as common as your position?
Again, you haven't read Moalemi and Mesler. It's not a property council approved study. There's no funding from the paper.
Why is
it the case? It's not property council paper.
One of the recent papers.
Stop lying, Drew. Why are you constantly lying?
I know the recent paper that everyone trumpeted.
I didn't bring that paper up.
Yeah, I know.
I don't care about that paper, Drew. I didn't bring it up. And by the way, that wasn't funded by the property councel. But I didn't even bring that paper up.
Yeah, but the property council endorsed it. And what I'm saying though,
I don't care if the property council endorsed it.
I'm saying why is it? I'm wondering. Why is it the case that your position
you're flying in the face of overwhelmingly the academic literature, which says that immigration has a statistically significant but nonetheless negligible impact on house prices and rents? You're flying in the face of all of that, right? And you haven't even read these studies. How would you know? You can't compete on the ACT example. You can't compete on the Victoria example. You have nothing, Drew.
You can't argue.
You have nothing, and the only way you can argue is pivot. You have to pivot to my beliefs or whatever.
You don't have an argument. You don't have an argument to explain why it's good.
Drew, just repeating what I'm saying doesn't actually make it true. Drew,
you can't argue
specifically,
it. You can't explain
Drew,
it.
Do you have a refutation? Do you have a refutation to the overwhelming consensus in the literature that immigration has a statistically significant but nonetheless negligible impact on house prices?
Statistically significant, and it's just fundamentally
Wait, what do you think statistically significant means? What do you think statistically significant means? What do you think that means? True. What do you think that means? True. Can you explain?
You can't pretend that supply.
You disagree with Cameron Murray then? You disagree with Cameron Murray. Why do you disagree with Cameron Murray?
You cannot. Fine then, I disagree with Cameron Murray. I don't care. Dude,
so what's your refutation? What's your refutation of his work? He's done extensive work on housing supply, right? What's the refutation of his work?
You cannot argue that there is no such thing as supply and demand when it comes to housing in the country.
I never said that, Drew. Stop strawmanning. I've never said that. I absolutely don't.
You act like it doesn't matter.
And you're flipping out because you can't make a specific refutation to the literature, which has overwhelmingly documented this issue, including Cameron Murray, who has said that housing supply isn't a primary issue. Molami and Mesler has said that immigration has a statistically significant but a negligible impact on house prices. You haven't made specific refutations to their methodology, to their findings. All you've said is all you've invoked is a paper that I didn't even reference. It isn't even funded by the Property Council.
Do you think that the First Fleet had a right to come and set up in Australia?
Say again, sir?
Do you think that the First
Fleet... It's a misdirection. It's a misdirection. Come on, Drew. Provide me a refutation of these papers. Provide me a refutation of these papers. Provide me a refutation of these papers that are consistent with the finding in the literature broadly.
Do you
haven't answered the question? Come on, Drew. Come on, Drew.
Tell us whether the First Fleet.
Give me a refutation of the overwhelming consensus in the academic literature about this question.
Do you think Australia should exist as a country?
Drew, why can't you answer? Why can't you provide your refutation?
Do you think Australia should be colonized?
Why can't you provide? Why do you have to pivot to all these other things?
Why can't you,
I feel bad for your audience. I feel bad for your audience. So you can't provide specific.
Do you think that it was a good or a bad thing?
Body of literature that disagrees with
European colonization of Australia was a good or a bad thing.
You have to pivot to these things. You have to pivot to make a bad thing.
Please, Adu.
There's nothing to do with the points I've made.
You're for freedom of movement, but you're against colonization. How does that work?
Drew, that has nothing to do with the points I've just made. Where is your refutation of Molami and Mesler? Where is your refutation of Cameron Murray?
You just go, why don't you cite 50 autistic studies? Is that
all they are? They're just autistic studies. You clearly haven't read these papers. You haven't even read Cameron Murray's work. You haven't read Cameron Murray's work. Your friend. I feel bad for Cameron Murray.
You haven't read his work.
I've read his work. I've read his book. I've read his papers.
You don't have to be a PhD level economist to argue about these issues.
I'm not a PhD level economist, Drew.
Okay, then shut the fuck up.
What is specifically your refutation of these papers, their methodology, their findings, whatever, right? That say that immigration has a statistically significant but a negligible impact on house prices.
What do you think should be?
What is your refutation of Cameron Murray, who says that housing supply isn't the primary issue of the housing crisis, and in fact we have an abundance of housing in this country?
How high should immigration go in Australia?
I don't have a set number. I don't think it's fair to have a set number.
Would it be good if in future 90% of the population of Australia was no longer Australian?
If they're Australian citizens, they're Australian. Drew, what is your refutation? I've just answered your question. Drew, I've answered your question. Drew, what is your refutation to Molami and Mesler, specifically the statistical significance, but nonetheless negligible impact of immigration on house prices? Why, Drew, I feel really bad for your audience because you can't answer this question.
Do you think it'd be a good thing?
I feel so bad. I feel so bad for your audience. You can't answer these questions. What is your answer to Cameron Murray saying that supply isn't a problem?
Do you think it'd be a good thing if tomorrow the entire population of Indonesia decided they had a freedom of movement right to just live in Australia and just Australia no longer existed?
No, because I don't think Australia could handle it.
Okay, then how do we draw that line?
Well, I think it's fine right now.
It's fine right now. I mean, at this current rate, we still have the highest historical levels of migration in Australian history.
That's fine. You still haven't fundamentally address the conclusions and methodology and findings of Molamir Mesler, of Cameron Murray, who directly refute your understanding of the housing crisis.
Have you heard?
Cameron Murray says supply isn't. Cameron Murray said that housing supply isn't essential.
This comes from France. This was actually something that people made to. They were talking about this in terms of they were mocking.
Why are you misdirecting? Drew, it's the constant misdirections. Constantly. We talk about the cooperative models. All you have to say is cumbersome. That's weak, Drew. I talk about the academic literature. You can't actually refute it.
So there's somebody who says that if you just view the society only through economic studies and economic lens, it's actually, you're failing to address the social side of human beings. And this is actually a term from France. And keep in mind, the French term autisme has an older meaning than the English term autism, and it signifies
this is not a counter argument.
Acceptance of fantasy rather than reality. Would you agree that, like Steve Keen, for example, the Australian economist, he says,
Steve Keen agrees with me. Bro, Steve Keen agrees with me.
Do you agree with this? Neoclassical economics has the characteristics of an autistic child.
I don't think that messaging is particularly great, but I'm sure.
I mean, that's how. But
I'm not Steve Keen.
If you're only viewing the world through only economics, you're missing the social side of human beings. Like, for example, human beings also have a culture that they want to be preserved, right?
Absolutely, but culture's informed by our material reality, right?
No, I don't think that culture is just informed by material reality.
So you think that like we have some kind of ideal that we uphold in our heads?
No, because I'm not like a sort of vulgar materialist. I don't think that
I'm not a vulgar materialist either. But again, I think a big part of the housing crisis is the hegemony of home ownership, right? I think that's a big cultural thing. I'm not as a vulgar materialist as you're making me out to be. And again, this isn't a counter argument, Drew. Make a counter argument to specifically the fact that
I'm addressing right now your insistence on these autistic papers, where you view human beings only as economic creatures.
No, Drew. This is not. We're not on the social question right now. We're talking specific because you made the claim that immigration has a large effect on the housing market, right?
But
so we're not talking about. No. We're not talking about how people perceive that. We're talking about whether it is. We're not talking about whether people perceive that.
We're not. Do you think that social cohesion is something that the government should actually try to uphold?
Come on, Drew. I'm going to leave. Okay, because you keep
for example, Malemi and Moron.
I'll catch you later, Drew. You can't answer. You can't refute the papers. You can't refute Cameron Murray, who disagrees with you. You can't address the actual arguments.
Cameron Murray agrees with me. Cameron Murray agrees with me insofar he thinks that short-term massive spikes in migration have a noticeable impact. Cameron Murray literally said that to me.
I also agree they have noticeable impact. That's why it's statistically significant. But you don't know what that means, Drew. Anyway. I'll leave you to it because obviously it's taken 3 hours for you to not answer. But I would like to do a bit of a panel if you want to.
We need to do a panel. We need to do a panel with Cameron Murray, and we also need to go beyond just economics, and we also need to talk about social cohesion and the social element of migration and multiculturalism.
Well, I mean, we've kind of delved into it because I spoke about the culture of home ownership that has plagued this country, which you initially agreed with. Then you initially agreed with, and then you're like, no, that's actually not true. And then you re-agreed later because you had no actual substantive backing behind it. But anyway, look. Anyway.
Last question.
Last question from Mitchell. No.
Why did collective ownership of housing produce better outcomes?
Say again, sir?
Why is it the case that collective ownership of housing will produce better outcomes? That's the last question.
Dude, why are you reading from the chat, bro? You're so weak. You're such a weak weasel, Drew. Come on. You need your own. You need the chat. You need the chat to uphold you.
Okay, dude. It's over. Terrible debate because you can't even talk. We'll do a panel discussion with Cameron Murray, and next time we have to talk about multiculturalism and the social element of migration.
Because I know you'll give it. You can't argue the housing point. I'm glad to talk about multiculturalism, but you can't argue the housing point. I'm glad.
All you did was read from the Discord. It was horrible. It was horrible. You read from the Discord, and you just
no one's messaging me on Discord
forever. Goodbye, Adu. Very weak. Very weak.
You have to. Why do you have to steal what I'm saying?
It's just sad. Goodbye, Adu. Goodbye. Very sad.
Well, I said very weak. I said you gave me counter arguments. That's all you've been saying, Drew. It's very you're floundering. I feel bad for your audience.
When I asked you how we're going to change society without violence, you just said magic. We're going to fucking cast a spell. Beautiful.
That's what you said, Drew.
Good luck with your magical kingdom, Adu. Next time we'll
Thanks,
talk about
Stuart. Good luck with the far right money. I hope you get a new stipend.
Next time we have to talk about.
Oh, and say hi to Percy for me as well.
Percy,
wait, can you ask Percy?
Percy said that I should be Australia.
Can you ask Percy a question for me? Can you ask Percy a question?
Percy's not my friend.
Great. Can you ask him a question for me, please?
Yeah, but I'm not friends with Percy.
That's fine. Can you ask him a question? Can you ask
I can't, but I don't talk to him. Because
can you just ask him what a recession is? I'd love for him to tell us what a recession is.
Good luck to you. But look, good luck with your magical. Good luck with your magical communism. Holy fuck! What torture. Fucking hell, guys. That was actually like a new form of torture devised by the CIA. Oh my God. Adu maybe is a CCP operative. Maybe Adu is a CCP operative. And maybe Adu was sent by the CCP to fucking mentally torture me for 3.5 hours. Like a fucking Maoist culture war session. Maoist struggle session. Literally, I was literally tortured more than I've ever been tortured by the CCP just by that torturous argument. My God.